The illusion of a regional war in the Middle East is over. We are now inside a global reckoning. China. According to intelligence reports, Iran is set to receive up to 400 advanced Chinese air defense missiles within weeks. But these weapons aren't flowing to Tehran in a straight line. They move through a secret corridor across Pakistan and along ghost routes designed to bypass the naval blockade. We will soon explore in full depth the map of this secret weapons route, as well as why the US has been dismantling bridges, tunnels and railroads along Iran's coast piece by piece, and the silent trap Beijing has fallen into. Before we begin, one small request. Independent geopolitical analysis like this gets suppressed by the algorithm. Subscribing, liking and dropping a comment helps this video reach the people who'd care about it. Now let's start with that secret route and the deal itself. The news that lit the fuse of this crisis arrived in the final days of July. Reportedly, Iran is set to receive Chinese-made shoulder-fired air defense systems, QW-12 and FN-16 missiles, in a deal worth $60 to $70 million. What's truly striking is the way these weapons are being delivered. The deal was signed not directly, but through a Hong Kong-based intermediary company, and the first shipment is set to travel by air from Urumqi in western China to Pakistan, then on to Iran. A thick curtain drawn between the end user and the real supplier. Both China and Pakistan flatly denied the reports. Still, the claims triggered serious alarm in Washington, and the American president reminded reporters that the Chinese leader had assured him no such sale would happen, adding that otherwise he would be quite disappointed. That fragile line of trust between the two leaders shows exactly why this is so sensitive. There's a widening contradiction between a Beijing that looks pro-peace in its official rhetoric and the accusations of indirect support flowing through intermediary firms. So why do 400 shoulder-fired missiles matter enough to spark a crisis this big? The answer lies in what these weapons actually are. They can't protect Iran's vast airspace against high-altitude bombers or ballistic missiles. Their range is only a few kilometers. But because small teams can carry them and constantly reposition them, they're far harder to hit than fixed batteries. Dispersed across the country, they can make America's low-altitude operations far riskier and far more expensive. The reason Iran needs this cheap but plentiful patch right now is clear. In its war with America and Israel, the country's fixed air defenses were largely destroyed, and Tehran is scrambling for a fast answer to low-altitude threats. Yet behind this move lies more than Iran's desperation. Beijing has its own calculation. A total Iranian collapse would deepen regional instability and push energy prices higher, a scenario China badly wants to avoid. And the choice of weapon itself gives the game away. A MANPADS isn't a red line system like a fighter jet. Because it's small, portable, and its source can be hidden, it lets Beijing prop up its ally at minimal risk. And what truly deepens Iran's desperation isn't only the collapse of its air defenses, it's the far more insidious campaign America is running in parallel. Now let's look at America's siege strategy. America's strategy along Iran's southern coast unfolded in two phases, and the second was far more devastating than the first. After Iran broke the ceasefire and began hitting ships in Hormuz, America intensified its bombing campaign and turned its focus to Iran's southern coast. The campaign's first wave targeted Iran's striking power in Hormuz directly. The Revolutionary Guard's coastal defense systems, missile and drone sites, radar stations, naval bases, and underground facilities were struck systematically. But the campaign quickly evolved into something far more insidious. Rather than hitting individual military targets, it set out to cut an entire port off from the rest of its country. The most striking feature was the nature of the targets. In just 2 days, at least 6 bridges and a tunnel around Bandar Abbas were damaged. The aim was legible even from the footage on state television: to sever the Revolutionary Guard bases there from the rest of the country. These strikes on road and rail bridges were meant to cut Bandar Abbas, Iran's main port, off from the roads linking it to the capital, Tehran. And the campaign reached beyond Hormuz. The strikes also damaged a maritime control tower at Chabahar on the Gulf of Oman, a port jointly operated with India. These strikes had not only a military dimension, but a civilian one, and that's the most contested part of the campaign. For the first time, Iran was forced to acknowledge attacks on its energy infrastructure, asking people in the southern provinces to use less electricity. With railway stations, water facilities and grain silos among the targets, the campaign underscores the risk it poses to Iran's population of 90 million. Here, a military ambiguity comes into play. A port like Bandar Abbas is a junction where both military resupply and civilian trade pass through, so striking a bridge leading to it halts a tank convoy and a food shipment in one blow. This dual function explains both the campaign's strategic brilliance and its human cost at once. As America erodes Iran's ability to sustain the war, it also paralyzes the country's civilian life and trade. That's why this is less a classic military operation than a siege aimed at breaking a nation's logistical backbone. And at the center of that siege lies the world's most critical waterway. But there's a much bigger target hidden in these road and rail strikes, one that isn't obvious at first glance. These routes are also the potential overland corridors carrying Iranian oil to China. With the sea route through Hormuz already shut by the American blockade, the overland rail and road links feeding oil to China, which make up most of Iran's export revenue, had become vital. But the bombing of exactly those routes running north and east from Bandar Abbas is rendering that alternative useless too. So America is killing two birds with one stone. It's cutting Iran's military resupply while also strangling Tehran's economic lifeline to Beijing, its oil revenue. And that second blow strikes a third giant directly: China. But if the logistical backbone was broken on land, what about on the water? Right there, in the waters of the Strait, a technology never seen before is taking the stage. And in a moment, we'll see how this war spread from land to sea, and from there to a country no one expected: Egypt. If a port sits at the center of the siege on land, a strait sits at the center of the war at sea: Hormuz. And the conflict playing out in these waters is no classic naval battle. It's a technological duel in which both sides reach for new and unfamiliar weapons. Iran tried to gain leverage by weaponizing the strait, that is, by threatening passage, going so far as to announce it had struck and disabled two supertankers passing through. One detail stood out in America's response. For the first time, it deployed one-way attack sea drones, driverless, explosive-laden naval craft. With that, the battle for the Strait took on an entirely new technological dimension. Iran's tactic was cruder, but no less dangerous. It claimed the tankers it hit had switched off their navigation systems and tried to pass through a mined route in Hormuz, meaning mines had been laid in the Strait's waters. The Strait's global weight shows why this duel concerns the entire world. Hormuz is a choke point through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil passes. The economic consequences of this mutual escalation were felt instantly. When America announced it was reinstating its naval blockade of Iranian ports, global oil prices jumped more than 9% on the news. And traffic in the Strait dwindled to a trickle. Tanker movement all but stopped, and insurance costs soared. The truly critical part of this picture is who loses more. The overwhelming majority of the oil passing through Hormuz goes not to the West, but to Asian economies. So every disruption in the Strait lands its heaviest blow not on America, but on Iran's biggest customer. Right there, in this picture, a third actor is affected quietly but deeply: China. And the scale of Beijing's vulnerability in this crisis is far greater than most people assume. So great that when the war spreads to new fronts, this vulnerability will turn into a real nightmare for China. But before we get there, we need to look at the silent panic Beijing has hidden behind the numbers. China is trying to appear neutral in this crisis, but the numbers reveal how desperate a dependency Beijing is trapped in. According to analysis firms, China buys more than 90% of the oil Iran exports. This isn't a dry statistic. Nearly every drop of Iranian oil flows to Chinese ports. This is no longer trade, it's Tehran's survival debt to Beijing. But the truly critical part of this dependency is Hormuz itself. Roughly 38% of the oil passing through that strait goes to Chinese ports. The world's most dangerous waterway is also the main breathing tube of China's economy. This single strait carries nearly half of all the oil China imports by sea. One spark in Hormuz strikes straight at the heart of China's factories. There's a special mechanism behind how this oil reaches China. Most of it is bought through small, independent refineries clustered in the country's east, nicknamed teapots, handled not by state giants, but by small players who stay under the radar. What this gives Beijing is plausible deniability. Even if these refineries get sanctioned, the systemic risk stays limited. This deniable middle layer is actually a pattern across every front of China's relationship with Iran. It's no coincidence the intermediary in the weapons deal is Hong Kong-based, a hub that keeps surfacing in Iran's procurement networks. And since 2023, America has sanctioned numerous Chinese and Hong Kong firms it accuses of supplying Iran. So whether it's oil or weapons, Beijing repeats the same method. It pulls the state out of view and pushes a commercial entity into the gap, so that when something goes wrong, the blame falls on the intermediary, not the state. But the war shattered this delicate balance. When the American-Israeli strikes began, Iran's production and exports collapsed, creating a massive supply gap for China overnight. And here's the clue to why China may be panicking right now. Beijing wasn't caught off guard. In the early months of the year, its oil imports surged to a record level, because it had sensed a coming energy crisis and quietly started filling its storage. Those reserves are substantial. China's strategic and commercial stockpiles are large enough to cover roughly 4 months of imports. But a buffer isn't infinite. China is draining these reserves rather than buying at high prices, and as that storage empties a little more each month, the 4-month window keeps narrowing. This isn't just a momentary supply problem, it underscores a far deeper lesson: the risk of tying your energy imports to a single choke point. Beijing has tried for years to reduce this dependency, diversifying sources, building overland pipelines, buying more from Russia. But nothing can instantly replace the volume Hormuz carries, and every Hormuz crisis only pushes China to accelerate. This is exactly China's trap. While keeping up its neutral rhetoric, it must in practice secure both the oil flow and Iran's survival. And the alleged manpads transfer risks upsetting that very balance. The real depth of this trap lies in the fact that each of China's options comes with a cost. If it arms Iran openly and forcefully, it opens a direct line of conflict with America, right before Xi's critical visit. If it does nothing, it faces losing its biggest source of cheap oil and its most important ally in the Middle East. Indeed, when America called on China to take a far more forward role, for instance, sending warships to protect shipping in the Strait, Beijing turned those appeals down. So China wants to keep Iran on its feet, but it prefers to do so not through direct military intervention, but by staying in the shadows, through exactly those intermediary firms and secret routes. And one of China's most important cards for escaping this trap is an overland corridor that would bypass Hormuz entirely, and the key to that corridor lies in Pakistan. China's escape plan from this trap rests on a single country, Pakistan. Islamabad is holding a delicate balance. On one hand, it's one of the main mediators trying to bring the sides back to the table. On the other, it sits right in the middle of the transit lines reaching toward China. And this overland dimension is indeed in play in delivering the weapons. According to intelligence sources, Tehran is trying to activate land routes to move Chinese materiel more discreetly, since a sea route is easily monitored, while an overland route makes it easier to slip past watching eyes. And at the heart of this corridor sits a strategic port, Gwadar. On the coast of Balochistan, this port is only about 180 nautical miles from the Strait of Hormuz, an alternative gateway just outside the strait. Gwadar's real promise for China is huge. Linked by road and rail to Xinjiang, it could carry Iranian and Gulf oil straight to China without passing through any of the straits, bypassing both the American blockade and the distant sea lanes entirely. On paper, this is a perfect escape plan. But that's exactly where the gulf between theory and reality opens up. The reason is simple. America's strikes on the road and rail lines around Bandar Abbas are rendering exactly these kinds of alternative corridors useless. With the sea route closed by blockade and the overland route by bombardment, Iran has no safe artery left to carry oil to China. China's Pakistan dream is crashing into the reality of today's war and falling apart. And at this point, the issue reaches far beyond the Pakistani desert, because in those same days, the war leapt to entirely new fronts, And in a moment, we'll see how Saudi Arabia entered the war and how Egypt was struck. What at first looked like a conflict between America and Iran has now become a regional blaze, and every new actor makes the equation more complicated. After a fragile lull, Iran launched fresh missile strikes on American forces in the region. An American base in Jordan was targeted, and Jordan's military announced it had shot down 5 Iranian missiles. But the real turning point was one of the region's most powerful states entering the war directly. For the first time, America and Saudi Arabia struck Iran-backed militias in Iraq in a joint operation. The rationale was that Saudi Arabia had faced more than 30 Iran-directed drone attacks in the past 72 hours. At least 20 militia fighters were killed and 32 wounded. Recall that Saudi Arabia spent 5 months carefully avoiding direct entry into this war, and the weight of the move becomes clear. The region's largest oil producer is now an active party. Behind this shift lies a critical Iranian calculation. Tehran treats its ability to strike the energy infrastructure of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia above all, as an asymmetric card. While its own sites are bombed, it pressures both Washington and its allies by threatening their oil facilities. And this logic inevitably widens the war. As Iran strikes a Gulf state's energy site, that state is drawn in by its own defensive reflex. So every new attack adds a new player to the table. But the spread wasn't confined to land. The truly dangerous expansion came on the sea lanes. Iran's Houthi allies declared a naval embargo against Saudi Arabia in July and began threatening passage through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the southern gateway to the Red Sea. And finally, the war leapt to an unexpected place: Egypt. At the Mediterranean port of Damietta, an American-operated liquefied natural gas unit was hit by a drone, with flames spreading to a second tanker nearby. The strategic weight of this strike is in its location. Damietta sits only 50 kilometers from the entrance to the Suez Canal, which links the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, right beside one of the world's most critical trade passages. A striking chain shows how these choke points interlock. Once the Houthis closed Bab el-Mandeb, Saudi Arabia rerouted part of its oil exports through the Red Sea towards Suez. So much so that in the week of the embargo, exports along that route rose 106%. So the strike on Damietta threatens not only Egypt, but the Saudi oil that fled to that alternative route. No one claimed the strike, and Iran flatly denied it. But the meaning was clear. All 3 of the sea choke points we named at the start are now under threat at once. The gateway to the Persian Gulf, the southern entrance to the Red Sea, and the Suez approach to the Mediterranean. The scale of this threat spurred Saudi Arabia into action. At a Riyadh meeting attended by representatives of 43 nations, 14 countries, among them Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan, backed a new multinational maritime defense coalition to protect shipping and energy routes in the Red Sea. The coalition's meaning runs beyond the military. The region's leading Sunni powers uniting against the Iranian Axis's threat to the sea lanes. Bringing Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, and the Gulf states to one table, it also makes visible the risk of the war turning into a sectarian, bloc versus bloc rivalry, one that could redraw the Middle East's balance of power for years. And this very expansion brings China's dimension directly into play. The reason is that if Hormuz is China's oil route, Bab el-Mandeb and Suez are the main artery of China's trade with Europe. The overwhelming majority of goods flowing from Asia to Europe pass through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So while Hormuz, the heart of China's oil imports, is locked, the Red Sea-Suez line, the gateway of its exports to Europe, comes under fire too. Having both choke points threatened at once amounts to a two-front nightmare for Beijing. Another attack by the Houthis and Iran on a ship in these waters isn't merely a regional event. It's a shift that could sever both China's energy and its global trade in one stroke. And this whole widening war brings us back to the real center of it all, the silent trap Beijing has fallen into. When widening fronts, locking choke points, and secret weapons routes come together, the picture that emerges is no single regional war. It's the reflection of great power rivalry onto the Middle East. America aims to weaken Iran to break both its nuclear threat and its regional influence. China gives indirect support to avoid losing Iran entirely. And into this equation, Russia's earlier contributions and the war in Ukraine are folded as well. These conflicts across different geographies are actually interlocking. Western support against Russia in Ukraine, the American operation against Iran in the Middle East, and China's maneuvers in Asia are all advancing at once. The concrete face of this interlock is the same three elements recurring on every front. Weapons transfers, sanctions, and energy corridors are now managed as parts of a single global equation. A missile shipment bound for Iran, an oil swing in Hormuz, and an aid package headed to Ukraine all moves on the same great chessboard. And Iran's place in this global equation isn't new either. Since 2022, Tehran has been supplying Russia with the drones used on the Ukrainian front, making it an indirect party to that war too. Now China arming Iran is one more link in the same chain. A Russia-Iran-China axis feeding the same anti-Western line on three separate fronts. This interlock also has a Taiwan dimension. By some analyses, China may be hoping to create room to maneuver in its own neighborhood, Taiwan above all, by drawing America's attention and resources toward the Middle East. So every new weapons transfer, every new strike, pushes the crisis to a level that is not merely regional, but global. In this picture, the options before the American president are also becoming clearer. One path is to keep up the pressure with limited strikes. The other is to shatter Iran's missile and command capacity entirely with an intense, prolonged air operation. Both options carry serious risk, and China's possible weapons support makes those calculations even more complicated. And all this tension is flowing toward a single point on the calendar: the Chinese leader's visit to America, planned for September. Confirmation of a weapons transfer before that visit could collapse the fragile trust between the two leaders in an instant, and bring the threat of economic retaliation to the table. This blaze in the Middle East long ago stopped being a war between two countries. What stands before us today is a global reckoning, where the interests of three great capitals, Washington, Beijing, and Tehran, collide all at once. And that reckoning makes one truth unmistakable. Modern power struggles are no longer won at the front, but in the choke points. In this crisis, no giant's hand is entirely free. Every move finds its price on another front, and the coming weeks will answer a single question. Will this deadlock be resolved through a settlement, or will one spark turn everything into a far greater fire? So do you think China will push this weapons route to the end and keep Iran on its feet? Or will its oil dependence on Hormuz and Xi's September visit force Beijing to step back? Tensions in the Middle East dramatically escalated to a critical turning point in the fifth month of the war. The moment the Houthis effectively went to war with Saudi Arabia in late July, the global equation turned upside down in an instant. On July 20th, they closed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to all Saudi-linked traffic, and within 72 hours, the first tankers were ablaze. Now take a look at the map. The Strait of Hormuz is nowhere near the Red Sea. This means the war has officially widened. The fire has leapt from one strait to another, to both flanks of a single peninsula at once. And the name of the place it leapt to sums up the fate of this story. Bab el-Mandeb, in Arabic, the Gate of Grief. Between Yemen and Djibouti, just 29 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, it is the only exit connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, and therefore connecting the Suez Canal to the world's oceans. Roughly 12% of global trade, a quarter of all container traffic, and, with Hormuz effectively shut these days, nearly all of Saudi Arabia's oil must pass through this narrow water. With both gates closed at once, a disruption reaching as much as a quarter of the world's oil and gas supply now sits on the table. And the markets priced that risk within seconds. Brent crude leapt nearly 7% that same week and pushed past $100 a barrel, the first time since late May. The panic gripped capitals too. London placed every movement in the region's waters under round-the-clock watch. Talk began of a joint Saudi-US-Israeli air operation across the strait, and nuclear-armed Pakistan declared it would use force if its ships were touched. Today we'll open every layer of this picture. Why and how the war leapt to this second strait, the calculations each side has placed on the table, Riyadh's helplessness, Iran's proxy card, Washington's dead end, and how, with the world's most powerful navies right there, a mountain militia managed to lock this gate shut. But before we open this picture step by step, a small request. Independent war and geopolitics analysis like this has lately been suppressed by the algorithm, and the video isn't reaching many of the people who'd want to see it. Subscribing, liking the video, and leaving even a single word in the comments directly helps us break through that suppression. Now, let's start with exactly how the war moved to this strait. To understand this blockade, you first have to see how the 5-month war reshaped the energy map. When the US-Iran war erupted in late February, Iran effectively shut the world's first oil gate, Hormuz, the narrow passage through which 20 million barrels a day, 20% of global supply, normally flows. Saudi Arabia answered that blow with a single move, and with that move, it tied its fate to this second strait. It opened the east-west pipeline, running from the eastern oil fields to the western port of Yanbu, to full capacity, shifted more than 70% of the exports it could no longer send through the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea, and began marketing the bulk of that oil to Asia, meaning through Bab el-Mandeb. The result was this. Traffic through a strait that carried roughly 2 million barrels a day before the war surged past 6 million by June, and almost all of that increase came from Saudi loadings. So, within 5 months, without even realizing it, the world put all its eggs in one basket. Once the first gate closed, it quietly entrusted the key to the entire global energy balance to this second gate. In military terms, a single point of failure, an entire system able to halt from the collapse of one place. And right on the shore of that single point waited a force with a 12-year unsettled score against Riyadh, armed with ballistic missiles and drones. Here is where the whole matter knots into one critical question. Why did Iran and the Houthis play this card, the one that made the world this fragile, not on the war's first day, but in its 5th month? The Iranian side of the blockade answers the first half of that question. According to international agencies, Tehran had passed the Houthis a clear instruction. If the US strikes Iran's power grid, close Bab el-Mandeb. And the calendar bears this out to the letter. On July 15th, Trump threatened Iran's grid. On the night of July 17th, the grid was struck, and 3 days later the blockade arrived. This is the summary of the line Iran has followed throughout the war. Rather than absorbing pressure on its own soil, it spreads it sideways across geography, opens a new front to split Washington's attention, and hands the bill to a proxy. So why did this card wait 5 months? The answer lies in the logic of deterrence itself. An unfired threat is stronger than a fired one, since as long as it sits in the quiver, it writes the line, "It could get worse," into the enemy's calculations. Once the US reignited the war, Tehran decided to cash that chip in. But the truly critical half of the question begins here, since reading this move as merely "Iran pressed the button" misses the single most important fact on the ground. The Houthis frame this blockade not through Iran's war, but insistently through their own account. Their justification is a 12-year Saudi blockade, their targets not American or Israeli ships, but specifically Saudi-linked traffic. And a senior Houthi official said plainly that the naval blockade will end only when the blockade on Yemen is lifted. The spark that lit the fuse was a product of this local account too. As the Iranian plane carrying a Houthi delegation home from Khamenei's funeral in Tehran was returning, the runway at Sana'a airport was bombed, and the plane diverted to Hodeidah. The Houthis blamed Riyadh. The Saudi-backed Yemeni government claimed the strike, and that same day, Houthi missiles falling on Abha airport formally buried a 4-year ceasefire that had held since April 2022. Here lies the crisis's most dangerous feature. This blockade has 2 separate locks, one in Tehran, one in Sana'a. A ceasefire reached with Iran doesn't automatically end the Houthis' own war, and a deal reached with Riyadh doesn't remove the chip in Tehran's hand. What stands here are 2 interlocked wars, neither closing until the other is solved. The practical consequence of this knot is this. Until now, hopes of ending the war have all been debated on the axis of, will Washington and Tehran sit down at the table? Yet this blockade shows that even if that table is set, there is no guarantee the Red Sea will open. The Yemen front is no longer a sub-branch of the main war, but a separate conflict with its own logic and its own calendar. And this divergence is the first sign of why the crisis will prove far more stubborn than anyone expects. And this double lock, as we'll see in a moment, is also the answer to why the markets priced this crisis so hard. When the blockade was declared on July 20th, many capitals took it for a bluff. 2 days later, it was clear it was no bluff. On the night of July 22nd to 23rd, the Houthis struck 2 Saudi tankers named Encilia and Layla with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones for violating the blockade. Both ships caught fire, with no lives lost. Sinking the ships was never the aim, and here lies the blockade's real genius. The Houthis have no navy to physically close the strait, so instead, with a single hit, they planted doubt in the minds of ship owners and insurers, and the market's fear handles the rest. Indeed, the war risk premium on southern Red Sea transits leapt from 0.3% of a vessel's value to 0.75%. In a single day, 5 Saudi tankers changed course. Saudi oil loadings collapsed by 36%, and Strait traffic fell from 38 ships to 27, without a single naval battle being fought. The truly grim part of this picture is that fear feeds itself. A tanker is hit, and the insurer raises the premium. The premium rises, and the ship owner changes route. The route changes, and fewer ships pass the strait. And as it empties, every remaining ship becomes a more visible and more tempting target. The Houthis turned this wheel with a single bullet, and the wheel now turns on its own. The secret of how a militia can close an entire sea lane with a single strike lies exactly in this psychological chain. The global market's reaction was measured in seconds. Brent leapt 7% that same day, to close at $100.69, touching $102 intraday. Its monthly gain topped 35%, writing the third sharpest such move in a decade, while at American pumps, gasoline climbed 37% since the war began to $4.09 a gallon. The truth beneath these numbers shows the crisis runs far deeper than price. A fully laden supertanker is too big, by its draft, for the Suez Canal. The only remaining route to Asia is around Africa, and that route adds 6,000 kilometers and 2 weeks. So as the strait closes, less oil reaches the market, and later, and the world is forced to burn through the stockpiles it has spent 5 months depleting even faster. The modest 188,000 barrels a day of extra output the major producers announced for September is a drop in the bucket beside that loss. So this is not a price crisis, but a calendar crisis. Every missing barrel is subtracted from the world's days left until normal counter. And the real break will come not on the price screen, but on the day that counter nears zero. Saudi Arabia entered this crisis with a war's most expensive damage. A deterrence whose credibility has been dented. The kingdom spent 5 months trying to hold the balance. It opened its bases to Washington, but never pulled the trigger. Stayed on the sidelines while the Emirates joined offensive operations against Iran, and even asked Washington to slow its operations during earlier phases of the war when Iran opened fire on the Gulf. The fire on Encilia's bow was the bankruptcy notice of that cautious strategy. Standing on the sidelines did not protect it from becoming a target. Houthi media reported that telecom facilities in the city and Kamaran Island offshore were hit, while the coalition said it had not struck the ports, and that all ports remained open to shipping. But this counterstrike, rather than easing Riyadh's position, pushed it into 3 separate dead ends. The first is the shield problem. According to some open-source analyses, the kingdom's most critical interceptor missile stockpile eroded by 86% over the course of the war, and the global production line cannot close that gap for years. This figure has not been confirmed by independent official sources, and we relay it with caution. If true, its meaning is that Riyadh enters the age of missile rain with a thinned umbrella. The second is the legitimacy trap, and this trap connects directly to the next great question. The target list the coalition named one by one on July 4th, Hodeidah, Ras Isa, Salif, overlaps almost exactly with the set of ports Israel had struck earlier. Coincidence or not, this overlap is a priceless gift for Houthi propaganda. Painting Riyadh as a partner on the same target sheet as Tel Aviv is now a one-sentence job. And this touches the very heart of that critical scenario being discussed in the regional press. With Bab el-Mandeb locked after Hormuz, it is written that Saudi Arabia, the US, and Israel could stage a large-scale joint air operation across the Strait, an unconfirmed but very real possibility on the table. Israel's interest in this equation is twofold: the security of the Red Sea line reaching Eilat and the pruning of Iran's proxy network. The Houthi blockade threatens both at once and offers Tel Aviv the chance to reframe its own war as the defense of international trade. But the flip side of the coin is a full trap for Riyadh. The kingdom striking Yemen while appearing to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel presses on the legitimacy nerve where Arab public opinion is most sensitive. All the more so while the Houthis already frame the blockade as resistance against the starvation of the Yemeni people. So even if this coalition is a military gain, its bill is charged on the political front. This is Riyadh's third and deepest dead end. And the most chilling variable of such a joint operation is a fragility no one says out loud. According to security experts speaking to American outlets, some Gulf states hold only a few days drinking water, and most of that water comes from desalination plants within Iran's range. The harder Riyadh or its allies strike Iran, the greater the chance Tehran targets those plants in return. And such a reprisal, far beyond economic damage, could cause a genuine humanitarian catastrophe, leaving millions without water. This is exactly why the coalition sits on the table, while the trigger stays unpulled. Every actor calculates the chance that the bill for the front it opens returns to its own cities, its own taps. The kingdom's dilemma is therefore a chess deadlock. Stay silent, and its deterrence and the Vision 2030 economic dream we mentioned erode, since the coastal megaprojects and foreign capital rest entirely on the Safe Kingdom brand. And onto that brand today fall photographs of burning tankers. Escalate the campaign, and it retreats into the Yemen quagmire it spent a decade struggling to leave, now with a thinned air defense and the stain of standing on Israel's side. Check has been called. Riyadh holds only expensive moves. And right into the middle of this deadlock, two giant powers no one expected stepped in at once. What turned this blockade from a regional reckoning into a global break was two great powers stepping onto the field in the same week. The first was the least headlined yet strategically heaviest move. On July 22nd, nuclear-armed Pakistan entered the fray. Consider this. Throughout this war, dozens of countries issued statements, condemned, voiced concern, but none carried the weight of a nuclear-armed state saying directly, "I will use force." Islamabad declared the threats against trade with Saudi Arabia unacceptable and announced that any touch on Pakistani-flagged vessels reserves every measure, including force, under the right of self-defense. Three things set this statement apart from an ordinary diplomatic note. The first, Pakistan holds nuclear weapons, so this is a warning with real deterrence, and for the first time a red line is being drawn for commercial ships. The second, Islamabad had until now been a mediator in this war, able to reach both Riyadh and Tehran on the phone at once. A capital in that position, openly warning one arm of the Iranian axis, is a measure of neutral ground physically shrinking. The chairs at the table are thinning. The third, there is a mechanism working behind the words. Pakistan's defense pact with Riyadh is no paper document, having been activated in March to deter heavier Iranian strikes on Saudi soil. So the nuclear power of the Muslim world draws a line for Iran and the Houthis in the same sentence. The clearest proof that this war is now governed not by a map of sects or blocks, but by the trade passing through the straits. And hours after that red line was drawn, in the same waters, the world's second largest power was tested. On July 23rd, two Chinese supertankers loaded with a combined 4 million barrels of Saudi oil advanced toward the Strait. Washington's worry had been summed up in a single question by Secretary of State Rubio. Will they strike a Chinese ship? And if they do, it becomes the whole world's problem. Two ships managed to pass, but maritime intelligence's note cancelled the relief. Those tankers had taken on their cargo before the blockade was declared. The real test will come with the ships that load at Yanbu after the blockade, and two of those ships are right now tracing uncertain circles in the Gulf of Aden. The free passage the Houthis granted Chinese ships in the past was Beijing's comfort. A Chinese ship carrying Saudi oil is where that comfort ends, and all three of the doors before Beijing are booby-trapped. Bargain with the militia for passage, and it rewards straight cutting and sets a precedent for its own Malacca nightmare. Send its navy to escort, and it becomes, for the first time in its history, an active party in a Middle East war. Wait, and the lifeline of its economy is left to another's mercy. The Malacca reference is no throwaway line. The long-acknowledged nightmare of Chinese strategy is that the overwhelming bulk of its energy imports passes through narrow waters a hostile power could close, and Bab el-Mandeb this week became the dress rehearsal of that nightmare, and the one doing the closing was not a superpower, but a militia. This scene is in fact the test tube of a far larger equation. China is Iran's largest oil customer, and, together with Russia, part of a balancing axis against the West. Yet that same China is more dependent than anyone on open trade routes. So a militia has pinned Beijing between the fire lit by its own allies and its own economic interests. The hidden cost of the escort option enters here too. A Chinese fleet protecting tankers from its base in Djibouti would be the first hot overseas combat commitment in Beijing's history. And once that commitment is made, it cannot be taken back, with every Strait crisis from then on inviting the Chinese Navy too. Should the Houthis strike a Chinese ship by mistake, the picture grows more dangerous still. In that moment, it would be exposed that the alternative world order Beijing claims to lead cannot even put out the fire lit by its own partners. And Washington is watching exactly this, since Beijing's every step will reveal whether China is a global security provider or merely a trading giant. That the world's number 2 power finds itself, for the first time in its history, needing the passage permission of a mountain militia is the one-sentence summary of how this war has toppled the global balance. And there is one more capital watching this picture. A Washington that cannot even read its own war correctly. At the center of all this widening stands a Washington whose power is beyond dispute, but whose strategy is lost. In the same week, Trump can play down what is happening with Iran as a skirmish, while declaring Tehran's bridges and power plants, the infrastructure of a capital of 10 million, nearly all of them civilians, open targets. As American broadcasters underline, threatening a capital's infrastructure this openly is something no US president has done before. Tehran's reply comes from the exact same logic as the Houthi blockade formula: an eye for an eye. Anyone striking Iranian infrastructure and anyone contributing to the strike is a legitimate target. That the same language of reprisal is spoken within a single week in Sana'a, Riyadh, Tehran, and Washington shows this war is now governed not by strategy, but by reflex. The picture on the ground is no more encouraging for Washington. The US bombed Iran for 12 straight nights, yet according to White House correspondents relaying from inside the administration, Tehran hasn't budged a millimeter from its negotiating position. The successive blows inflict pain, but they don't change behavior. The escalation options before the administration each open onto a separate cliff. A ground operation is a quagmire Trump openly doesn't want. Striking the capital's infrastructure risks civilian casualties and international backlash. And hitting the deep nuclear sites buried under 120 meters of rock is an uncertain military gamble. The human part of the bill grows heavier. Hundreds of American troops have been wounded, 18 killed, and Trump went to Dover base to receive the bodies of the last 4. That question they call the Dover test in Washington sits on the table. Will each new decision be worth the coffins landing at that base? The contradiction on the justification front runs even deeper. The war's declared aim is to end Iran's chance at a nuclear weapon. Yet in March 2025, Trump's own intelligence director had put on record that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. And after last summer's strikes, Trump had repeatedly declared that capacity totally obliterated. To wage war to end all over again a capacity already totally obliterated is nothing but a campaign that has lost its target searching for a justification. And the war is spreading everywhere. While the Pentagon piles F-16s, F-35s, and refueling aircraft into the region, American press writes that the number of countries struck since the return to office could reach 8. With Mali, the same navy cannot keep Hormuz open, sweep the Red Sea, and deter its real rival in the Pacific all at once. Every new front means power stolen from the last. Every actor who sees American power can be divided calculates that the cost of opening its own front has dropped, and the Houthi blockade is precisely the first fruit of that calculation. The sound of brakes finally came from Congress. The House of Representatives on July 24th passed a bill restricting the president's war powers in Iran. The bottom line is this: the world's most powerful military is on the field, but its strategy is lost, and every vacuum where deterrence vanishes is being filled, as we saw this week, by smaller but more determined hands. Which brings us back to the real question we asked at the very start of this video. With the world's most powerful navies patrolling these waters, how can a mountain militia without a single warship lock this gate shut? The answer lies in war's cheapest yet most effective doctrine. To use a sea yourself, you need a strong navy. But to deny it to your enemy, missiles lined up on the shore, drones, and a doubt planted in the enemy's mind are enough. Here is the cruelty of that math. A drone launched from the coast costs tens of thousands, while the interceptor that must down it costs millions. And the defender has to be right every single time, while the attacker wins with a single hit. So even taking a loss on every salvo, the Houthis come out strategically ahead, since they erode their enemy's arsenal at many times the cost of their own. In the 1980s tanker war, a solution to this problem was found. Washington flew its own flag on Kuwaiti tankers, formed convoys with warships, and forced the traffic open. Why that recipe fails today is summed up in a single sentence. Back then, the threat was in one strait and came from the sea. Today, 3 straits are squeezed at once, and the threat comes from a place a convoy cannot escort. This is why this blockade is no longer merely a Middle East headline, but a manual read in every general staff from the Taiwan Strait to Malacca, from Gibraltar to Panama. The 300-year default of maritime trade, the idea that the flag a ship flies protects it, that freedom of navigation is free, cracked this week in a 29-kilometer ribbon of water. A ship's fate is now determined not by its flag, but by the origin of its cargo and a list of militia declared by email. And what remains is a precedent question still unanswered. If a body that isn't even a state can single-handedly tax the waters through which a quarter of world trade passes, who will try the same method tomorrow, and in which strait? Centuries ago, sailors named this strait the Gate of Grief for the ships that sank in its waters. In the summer of 2026, that name reached its widest meaning. Today, every tanker that cannot pass through that gate nudges a refinery, a factory, a home, somewhere in the world, a little closer to darkness. The crisis that began 5 months ago with the closing of a single strait has today become a 3-strait siege. And the hand that forged the last link of that siege belongs not to the world's most powerful armies, but to a militia in the mountains of Yemen. And here is what truly gives pause. Even if the blockade is lifted tomorrow, the doubt etched into ship owners' memory and insurance premiums won't be wiped away easily. A route once proven vulnerable is never again priced as safe as before. When the US military launched its last major attack on Iran at the end of July, this is what it did with bunker busters against the besieged forces and against the country's entire coastal system. And the bombardment is in its 12th night, running without pause. Tuesday night, B-1 heavy bombers joined this war for the first time. They took off from a base in the United Kingdom, and since that night, they have been bombing Iran's entire southern coastline and Tehran for 3 nights without a break. The load that aircraft carries also tells you what the target is. A single B-1 can carry 24 2,000-pound bombs or dozens of cruise missiles, the largest bomb load in the American inventory. And those bombs weren't designed for a radar antenna on the surface. They were designed to punch through concrete and rock and detonate inside. And it isn't only bombers flowing into the region. Aerial refueling aircraft, C-17 transports, A-10s, and electronic warfare platforms were massed there the same week. We'll come to that picture shortly. Now we'll see, step by step, what those bombs did. First, on Iran's coasts, in its ports, and in the tunnels beneath the ground. Then, above Tehran. But before we go down to that coast, a small request. Independent war and geostrategy analysis like this has lately been suppressed by the algorithm, and the video isn't reaching many of the people who'd be interested. Subscribing, liking the video, and leaving even a single word in the comments directly helps us break through that suppression. Now we're heading to the coast. Since Tuesday night, those Lancers have been flying without pause, and they dropped their loads first on Iran's southern coast. Follow that coastline on the map. At the mouth of the Strait sits Bandar Abbas, the main base of Iran's navy and the country's largest commercial port. Just east of it, Sirik. To the northwest, Bushehr. At the northern end of the Gulf, the port cities of Khuzestan, Mashhad, Sarbanda. And to the east, close to the Pakistani border, Chabahar. Every one of those names appeared on the target list of the last 12 nights. So what's being struck isn't individual facilities, it's an entire coastline. And the real strength of that coast was never on the surface. Which is exactly where you see why the B-1 Lancer fleet was called in. The timing is no coincidence either. The Lancers came into the fight only days after Trump signaled a possible strike on an Iranian underground nuclear facility. His own words were blunt.
And we will absolutely attack any site where they're even thinking about nuclear. We'll be hitting it very, very powerfully.
Since Iran has spent decades building its coastal defense underground, missile positions carved into mountains, munitions depots buried in rock, fast attack craft pens cut through coastal cliffs and opening directly onto the sea. Tunnels, underground command centers, entrances concealed behind false openings. The logic was simple. Everything on the surface can be struck in the first hours. A headquarters meters beneath the ground cannot. That doctrine is why the regime, under months of campaigning, could still issue orders and still fire missiles. At least it cannot be struck with an ordinary bomb. Bunker buster munitions were designed to solve exactly that problem, and the platform that carries them in the largest load is the Lancer. Indeed, those bombs were filmed being loaded at the base in the United Kingdom. An Al Jazeera crew recorded ground teams at Fairford loading bunker-busting bombs onto bombers, fitted with kits that turn unguided munitions into precision weapons. Yet what should be measured about this underground architecture isn't its depth, it's its breadth. No underground facility lives on its own. It needs ventilation, it needs power, it needs water, it needs a steady resupply line for personnel and munitions. And all of those connections surface sooner or later. Which is why a campaign targeting the underground focuses not on the inside of the mountain, but on the points where the mountain meets the surface. Entrance mouths, ventilation shafts, power lines, supply roads. A tunnel that cannot breathe is no longer a headquarters, it's just a cellar. The second weakness is communication. A command center meters beneath the ground can speak to the surface only through cable or antenna, and those connection points sit on the surface. Depth protects you from a bomb, but starves you of signal. The deeper you go, the less you can talk to the outside world. The target list Central Command released on the night of July 22nd confirms this. What was struck? Maritime capabilities, missile and drone storage facilities, coastal surveillance sites, and air defense assets across southern Iran. It's easy to take that list for an ordinary target breakdown, yet there's a sequence inside it, and that sequence tells you how an entire coastal defense was dismantled. First, the eyes. Coastal surveillance sites are a Navy's radar network. Which ship is where, on what heading, at what speed? That's where it's seen. Once those sites go silent, every weapon left behind goes blind. An anti-ship missile in the hands of a system that can't see its target is nothing but a tube. Then the hands. Missile and drone storage facilities, most of them underground. Then the arms. Maritime capabilities, fast attack craft, mine-laying vessels, naval bases. Indeed, reports of a strike on the Ziyarat naval base at Sirik came the same night. And finally, the shield. Air defense assets. Take those four in sequence and there's no coast left to defend, only a strip that can be flown over freely. The map explains why that strip matters so much. Iran's southern coast is the country's only real door to the outside world. There's the Caspian to the north, but the Caspian is a closed sea. You don't reach the ocean from there. So exports and imports, oil and food, all pass through the same narrow strip, and the ports lined along it are also the Navy's bases. At Bandar Abbas, the commercial terminal sits beside the naval base. At Chabahar, the port and military infrastructure are intertwined. Before the war, that was an advantage. Logistics gathered in one place. In war, it reversed completely. A single strike costs you military and commercial capability at once. There's also the layer directly behind the coast: fuel depots, shipyards, repair facilities, and underground storage areas. So when a port is struck, what's affected isn't the key, it's the entire backyard that keeps that key running. The result has become measurable too. By Central Command statement, since the blockade resumed, 9 commercial vessels have been rerouted and 1 has been disabled. And this dismantling has no way back, or rather, it isn't meant to. Most of the targets struck aren't the kind you replace in a few days. Rebuilding a coastal surveillance radar means first sourcing the equipment, and most of that equipment comes from supply chains under sanctions. Renewing a fast attack craft flotilla takes shipyards, engines, and electronics. Replacing an air defense battery means buying from abroad, and sealing a pierced tunnel network again is an engineering job measured in months. So every link cut each night takes away not only today's capability, but the capability of the months ahead. When a country cannot replace what it loses, that loss isn't damage, it's erosion. And the strategic consequence of that erosion gathers in one place: Hormuz. Since the start of this war, Tehran's strongest card has been the ability to threaten maritime traffic through the Strait. That ability isn't a missile. It's a chain made of radar, depot, boat, base, tunnel, and air defense. If one link breaks, the others manage. But if all of them are cut, what's left isn't a threat, only a statement. And the links of that chain were cut one by one over 12 nights. And that same night, the war entered the capital. Air defense systems were reported active east of Tehran. Accounts from the ground described explosions in the direction of Pardis and heavy defensive activity over the capital's skies. The site that stood out as a target was telling: Parchin, one of the Revolutionary Guard's large military complexes, and a target already struck in February and March of this war. It isn't hard to see why Parchin keeps appearing on the list. This isn't a single barracks. It's a sprawling military-industrial complex of hundreds of structures, including munitions production and test ranges. It sits just southeast of the capital, the doorstep of Tehran's defense industry. When a military complex on a capital's doorstep can be struck a third time, the air defense ring around that capital has already been pierced. Nor are the targets around the capital limited to that. Throughout this war, the area around the airport west of Tehran has been struck repeatedly. The military airspace ringing the capital was among the campaign's earliest targets. Civil aviation taking its share was inevitable. When air defense fires all night over a country's capital, that sky closes to scheduled flights as well. The same night, an explosion was reported in a residential building in the Narmak district in the north of the capital. The regime's state media announced it as a gas explosion. That announcement is itself the clearest indicator of the night. When an administration explains a midnight explosion in its capital as a gas accident while the whole country has been bombed for 12 nights, that isn't information, it's a management decision. The aim isn't to convey the truth, but to make the capital look normal. And the price of that choice is heavy. You can deny a strike on the front line, nobody's looking there. But in a capital of millions, someone who hears air defense that same night and then sees the words gas accident on screen makes a choice between the two. And that choice never falls on the side of the screen. Another part of the capital matters far more in military terms. The northeast of Tehran is known as the district where the residences of the regime's senior figures sit, and those residences are assessed to connect to underground shelters. So air defense firing over the capital isn't merely a technical event. It's a declaration that the regime's most protected surroundings are now within range. Nor did the wave stop at the capital. That same night, explosions were reported at points that hadn't been seriously targeted in this war until then, such as Kashan and Zanjan. Tabriz shook in the northwest. A refinery was struck in Mashhad. A fire in the mountains around Shiraz grew for hours. The meaning is simple. the target list is no longer geographically bounded. At the northern end of the coastal line sat a target of an entirely different kind, Khuzestan. That night, successive heavy explosions were reported in Avaz, Mashhad, Sarbandar, and Ramshir. The Shalamche border area and terminal were struck. A point near Andimeshk was targeted. Explosions were heard in Bushehr and Sirik. Yet one target on that list carries a meaning different from all the others: the Valier Asa base in Avaz. By the accounts, this base is one of the Revolutionary Guard's most important command centers in Khuzestan province. And what it oversees isn't merely a garrison. The province's armored units, commando units, missile units, artillery units, and naval elements are all tied to this center. And the most critical layer: the same base also oversees the province's regional Revolutionary Guard and Basij battalion network. The Basij isn't a frontline formation in the conventional sense. It's a militia network, organized in cities, in neighborhoods, in factories, and in universities. And this network's real function for the regime isn't fighting an outside enemy, it's maintaining control inside. It's the structure that disperses a crowd in the street, sets up checkpoints, and knows the neighborhood. Strike an army's division and you reduce its strength at the front. Strike a militia network's regional command node and you've touched that regime's capacity to govern its own street. Since the value of the Basij structure lies not in its weapons but in its network, an organization that knows who lives where, knows the neighborhood, and can gather a crowd within hours. When that network's central coordination breaks, the units don't vanish, but they can no longer move at once on a single order. And the entire power of an internal security apparatus comes from exactly that simultaneity. Why Khuzestan was chosen becomes clear from the geography. This is Iran's heart of oil and industry, a province facing the coast, the ports, and the Iraqi border all at once. The country's export artery and its military logistics intersect on the same ground. The same night, a large fire was reported at a military base in Bebahan. The spread of the flames in the footage suggests not a single building, but a whole facility area caught fire. And this campaign's quietest layer was seen that night as well. Satellite imagery revealed that the large antenna on Delak Mountain northwest of Shiraz was heavily damaged after the recent strikes. Indeed, it appears to be gone. The logic of this target differs from all the rest. When an antenna is struck, no missile and no boat is destroyed. What is destroyed is the connection. The line between units in the regions and the military command centers. And an army's most dangerous condition isn't being left without weapons. It's being left unable to hear itself. On top of this military picture, something else was added the same week: a new rule. Trump's statement was blunt. From now on, every time Iran fires at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, by missile, by rocket, by drone, by whatever means, America will destroy one bridge or one power plant. And that includes facilities inside or right beside the capital, Tehran. And this rule wasn't declared in a vacuum. The same week, the physical preparation on the ground became visible too. Central Command announced that more than 50,000 American service members are deployed in the region and on full alert. Air assets were added to that. The president made clear that this is not peace, only a pause. That if diplomacy fails, far more severe strikes will follow. On one side, tankers burning in the Strait of Hormuz and 50,000 American troops standing ready. On the other, that massive annihilation plan leaked out of Qatar. According to reports, the US and Israel, with the logistical support of 4 Gulf states, have already prepared a 15-day large-scale operation aimed at destroying Iran's underground missile and nuclear facilities at numerous locations. This is not only an air campaign either. The US is redeploying its last forces in Iraq to regions near the Iranian border, and Trump has removed Pakistan entirely from the list of mediators, accusing it of favoring Iran at the negotiating table. And right now the situation is critical and escalating dramatically. As every sign on the ground whispers that this chance may be the last, Iran too seems to be losing this last chance. Because the provocations on the ground do not let up for a moment. On August 3rd, near the Strait of Hormuz, a cargo ship was struck by an unidentified projectile, and US Central Command announced that it had neutralized 2 Iranian vessels under the naval blockade. Trump's cards are on the table as well. declaring, "Nothing gets through to Iran unless we want it to." He demands that the Strait be opened first, and that in a second phase, Iran's nuclear capacity be dismantled. On top of that, a bombshell that retired General Jack Keane detonated on Fox threw everything into further confusion. According to the four-star general's stunning revelation, the Gulf states are not willing to pay the price of ridding themselves of Iran's aggression and are actively sabotaging the operation. Yet Trump made clear he will not settle for merely watching this quiet resistance, and he is no longer seeking Allied approval. With 50,000 troops on the ground and his B-2 Spirit aircraft, he is preparing to press that button despite the Gulf's reluctance. At this point, as the shadows and panic of Russia and China behind Iran grow, Trump's last chance rhetoric is becoming a major reality in the current escalation. Indeed, this last chance works both ways. While Iran strengthens its defenses a little more each day and draws Russia and China ever closer to itself, it may also be the last chance for a United States whose options are rapidly running out. That is precisely why the file on the table is clear. A 15-day, uninterrupted annihilation campaign to be carried out with logistical support that Israel and 4 Gulf states will provide, willingly or by force. And at the center of this threat lies a single target: Iran's most heavily fortified underground nuclear fortresses in the world, buried hundreds of meters beneath the mountains. Now let's go straight to the heart of the matter, to those silent nuclear cities beneath the mountains. At the technical heart of this crisis stands a single name, and the entire strategy revolves around it: Fordo. This uranium enrichment facility near the Iranian city of Qom is no ordinary plant. It is an underground fortress carved into the rock, precisely 80 to 90 meters beneath a mountain. That depth renders it nearly untouchable by almost any airstrike. Even Israel's most advanced bombs cannot reach that deep, and that is the real reason the US must step in. The only weapon that can strike this facility is a roughly 13.5-ton GBU-57 in America's arsenal. A massive penetrator bomb designed to bore through dozens of meters of concrete and rock before detonating. But here is the critical point. The only aircraft that can carry it is the B-2 stealth bomber, and each B-2 can carry only 2 at a time. In the first strike back in 2025, reaching Fordo required dropping nearly 14 of these massive bombs on a single facility. Each B-2 mission is a complex operation requiring mid-air refueling, one that cannot be flown safely over that region unless Iran's air defenses are fully dismantled. And experts say a single strike may not be enough to destroy this facility entirely. Full destruction requires waves of strikes, one after another. By some assessments, even if the bombs cannot completely collapse the facility, merely cutting power to the centrifuges or disabling the ventilation would count as a success. When a country's most critical military target can only be destroyed by repeated strikes, even with the most powerful bomb on the planet, striking that target is not an operation, but a full-blown campaign. And that is the real reason behind the 15-day plan. Because Fordo is only the most famous of the dozens of facilities Iran has buried underground. So what exactly is on the target list of this 15-day campaign? Iran's underground program is not concentrated at a single point. It is a network dispersed across the country, into mountains and granite masses. When we open this map region by region, it becomes clear why US planners are so hard-pressed. At the center stands Iran's nuclear heart, Natanz, roughly 250 kilometers south of Tehran, for many years the country's enrichment backbone and its most heavily guarded centrifuge site. And just 1.5 kilometers to its south, something far more unsettling is being built, known locally as Pickaxe Mountain, a new facility carved 80 to 100 meters beneath the granite rock, that is, even deeper than Fordo. So deep that experts assess it was dug to hide beyond the reliable reach of existing bunker-buster bombs. The Isfahan complex is the heart of production and assembly. Parchin, near Tehran, is a site associated with nuclear experiments that was struck again only this past March. Beyond the nuclear site stretch the missile cities that hide Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, and these too lie meters underground. In the west, inside the Zagros Mountains, Khorramabad. To its north, the Kermanshah base hidden in the Kenisht Canyon, housing Qiyam and Fateh-type ballistic missiles. In the northwest, around Tabriz, tunnels fitted with vertical launch silos. In the southwest, near Shiraz, a complex where 4 separate tunnel entrances can be made out in satellite imagery. Along the country's southern coast, around Haji Abad and Bandar Abbas, lie naval missile bases carved into the rock, capable of launching missiles directly from concealed, vertical positions, the physical source of Iran's ability to threaten Hormuz. And the production facilities feeding this entire network are concentrated in Parchin and Kogier in Tehran province. Looking at this picture, the reality facing the US emerges. The target is not a single building. It is a network of genuine underground cities, scattered hundreds of kilometers apart, each protected by meters of rock and concrete, some at depths bombs cannot reach. When a country's most valuable military assets are hidden this deep and this dispersed, erasing them from the map in a single night is close to impossible. And that is precisely the merciless arithmetic behind the number 15 days. So if these facilities were struck once already, why is the threat still on the table? The answer lies in the lesson Iran drew from the war. After the 2025 strikes, Iran decided to move its nuclear program even deeper, even more secretly. According to Western and Israeli assessments, the most important conclusion the regime drew from the war was this: to escape the eyes of international inspectors and intelligence satellites, shift the remainder of the program into new underground facilities. In other words, the bombs destroyed a fortress, but the program went even further underground. And time is working in Iran's favor. By experts' assessment, with its stockpile of enriched uranium, Iran has approached a threshold where, if it decides to, it could produce the material needed for many nuclear warheads within a short time. This threshold question may seem like a technical detail, but it is actually the clock of the entire crisis. Once uranium is enriched beyond a certain level of purity, reaching weapons grade becomes measurable in days. This is the answer to the "why now" question. Every passing month means Iran drawing a little closer to the threshold and hiding its facilities a little deeper. For the US, the equation is merciless. The longer it waits, the more unreachable the targets become, and the more opportunities Iran finds to rebuild. Even Iran's ground forces spokesman openly stated that they fully exploited the ceasefire periods to import new equipment and repair damaged systems. When a country openly declares that it uses every span of time it gains against you to rearm, waiting becomes an increasingly costly option for the other side. The plan on the table today is built on precisely this campaign logic. Prepared while Qatar mediates ongoing negotiations, this operation is a roughly 15-day massive annihilation plan, covering some 15 critical underground facilities scattered across Iran's geography. The critical scale here is this. This is not a single night raid or a strike limited to a few targets. It is a full-scale air campaign covering dozens of facilities spread across Iran's terrain, lasting for days, consisting of waves of strikes one after another. The US military's announcement that it is ready for a series of strikes targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure and the listing of power plants and oil refineries among the priority targets in a possible campaign show that this plan has not stayed on paper. And behind this design lies a very clear military logic. A retired American general's warning on this is striking. If you're going to launch an air campaign, you have to finish it. Otherwise, just as happened in Vietnam in the 1960s, the enemy uses every pause to repair and rebuild its systems, and the campaign proves ineffective. This is why the plan is designed to strike targets in one continuous stretch. The target list is not limited to nuclear facilities either. Coastal radars, anti-ship missile systems, the elements threatening traffic in Hormuz, supply routes, and energy infrastructure are all on the list. But each link in this broad target list carries a separate risk of escalation, because every new strike could bring a new missile salvo from Iran in response. And that response would directly target US bases and its partners in the Gulf. The more comprehensive an operation, the broader the response it triggers. And that is precisely the equation that most challenges the planners. And this is where America's greatest vulnerability emerges. And that vulnerability lies not in Iran's missiles, but in America's own depots. Over months of this conflict, US missile defense stockpiles have eroded seriously. By an independent think tank's assessment, the US now has fewer than 827 Patriot interceptors and fewer than 278 THAAD interceptors left. According to sources, these estimates are quite close to the government's own internal figures. The numbers are even more striking. By these assessments, roughly 65% of Patriot interceptors and more than a third of THAADs have already been expended. On top of that, the US is said to have consumed nearly half its global Tomahawk cruise missile stock since the war began. In the first 16 days alone, 535 Tomahawks were fired, at a cost of roughly $2 billion. And replenishing these stocks is not easy. Even if ordered today, a Patriot missile takes more than 2 years to arrive, and for the most sophisticated systems that span reaches 3 to 4 years. This is where the hidden heart of the crisis beats. Every new wave of strikes triggers an Iranian response. Every response burns through more of America's defensive missiles, and those missiles cannot be replaced. This is why the Pentagon's real nightmare is not Iran. It is that these stocks are also needed for a possible crisis against China in the Pacific. When a superpower's appetite for attack depletes its own defensive stock, the real limit for that power is not the enemy's strength, but the bottom of its own arsenal. So nobody today knows for certain how close the weapons threshold is. And that uncertainty is the real fuel of the ground operation debate. If you don't know, you can't wait. When bombing doesn't let you measure the result, one road remains: go and take it. For a raid team, though, descending into that network is nothing like walking into a building on the surface. Down there, time works for the defender rather than the attacker. Fittingly, this scenario is said to sit in the highest risk category in Pentagon assessments. The most valuable target is also the most dangerous one, which is exactly why planners are looking at something more reachable: the sea. A quick break. Liking, a one-word comment, and subscribing directly help this analysis reach far more people. It only takes a few seconds. Now we come to the two islands on the table. Taking control of the strategic islands in the Persian Gulf is the most direct way to secure Hormuz in practice, and there are two names on the table. The first is Karg. Roughly 15 miles off the coast, and about 90% of Iran's oil exports pass through it. An entire country's export economy flows through a single loading point. Bomb it, and the facility gets repaired. Seize it, and the tap is in your hand. Heavy names back the idea. The former commander of Central Command, retired General Frank McKenzie, openly proposed a landing, and his reasoning was political rather than military. Owning Iranian soil would be a significant card in future negotiations. By another retired commander's assessment, 1,500 Marines might be enough to secure the island. The second island is far larger and far more strategic: Keshm. Sitting at the very mouth of the Strait, it is the largest island in the Persian Gulf. And the center of Iran's ability to threaten maritime traffic is there. Beneath the island lies an extensive tunnel network assessed to store anti-ship munitions. American forces have pounded the island's defense systems in recent days. Set the two side by side to see the difference. Take Karg and you cut Iran's revenue, an economic blow. Take Keshem and you control the Strait itself, a strategic blow. The first leaves the regime without money, the second removes the war's cause. But the unspoken part of the plan isn't the landing, it's the morning after. An expert at the Washington Institute puts it in one sentence: you wouldn't want to be on that small island while Iran can rain down drones and artillery. The sharpest answer came from an Iranian official. The Americans can take the island for a day, but they can't hold it. Our missiles reach there from Semnan, from Zahedan, from Isfahan. The force balance supports that objection. Iran fields 570,000 active and 350,000 reserve personnel, plus coastal missile batteries, naval mines, and swarms of fast attack craft. 15 miles isn't far outside artillery range. A landing force would run all its resupply from the sea, and that line would pass through shallow, mineable water. The gap between taking a position and holding it always appears in the same place in military history: supply. On Keshem, the problem multiplies. A bigger, more populated island laced with tunnels underneath. A landing force there would have to clear not just the shore, but what lies beneath it. Here is the dead end in American planning. The easy target doesn't deliver enough, and the target that delivers isn't easy. And right inside that dead end, a third layer enters. Not soldiers arriving from outside, but the population already inside. A few million people taking to the streets at once does what no division can. Yet a technical wall stands in the way, coordination, and the surveillance machine makes it nearly impossible. So Washington's cheapest option depends on the one thing it cannot hold. So how is Iran preparing for this possibility? Footage from the ground shows armored vehicles being moved through Khuzestan toward the south, toward the Kuwaiti and Iraqi border. The direction is no accident. The most logical door for a ground entry is this plain, the heart of Iran's oil and industry. Kurdish opposition parties report a larger picture, a deployment of tanks, artillery and drones to the Iraqi border, along with roughly 3,000 special forces personnel. No independent source has confirmed a deployment on that scale. What's more, by those groups' own account, the purpose isn't to counter a landing, but to prepare against them directly. Militarily, the same problem holds in either scenario. Moving armored columns hundreds of kilometers across a theater where the sky belongs entirely to the other side means visibility, not defense. Indeed, some of the targets struck in recent operational footage were vehicles on the move. The regime's rhetoric runs the opposite way. Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf says his forces are waiting for the Americans to come ashore. Former Foreign Minister Mottaki goes further. Rather than settling for hitting bases, he argues, Iran should consider taking American soldiers prisoner. The regime is looking for on the ground the parity it could never achieve in the air. But the real admission was the army spokesman's line on state television. If the Americans come in, we won't hesitate to bomb our own country. An army is planning not to fight the invader in the field, but to strike its own soil with underground missiles. In military terms, it's called scorched earth. And when a state declares it on television, it has stopped counting on winning a ground war itself. Another sign of the same desperation circulated on those screens. State television called on ordinary citizens to open fire on enemy helicopters and aircraft. A regime that built a billion-dollar air defense architecture is telling its people to shoot at the same sky with whatever they have. Washington isn't the only side talking about a ground operation. Kuwait is one of the most densely garrisoned places for American forces in the region. Camp Arifjan, Ali al-Salam Air Base, Camp Udairi. As far as Iran cannot reach the bases of the power striking it, it has turned on that power's host. Power generation plants and desalination facilities were hit 4 days running. The grid took so much damage that portable generators were brought in, and sirens sounded nationwide. Kuwait summoned Iranian diplomats in protest. But against missiles cutting off a country's water, a diplomatic note is a tool that stays on paper. The real issue is the threat that followed. To launch a ground operation into Kuwait and take American soldiers prisoner back to Iran. Most places dismiss this as a bluff. Yet, a small-scale rehearsal has already happened. On May 1, 2026, 6 soldiers of the Revolutionary Guard infiltrated Kuwait's Bubiyan Island aboard a rented fishing boat. In the ensuing clash, 4 of the team were captured and 2 escaped. The choice of target was no accident either. Bubiyan hosts the Mubarak al-Kabir port, built with Chinese financing. That precedent lets us read the threat correctly. Iran invading Kuwait in the classical sense isn't possible. The two countries share no land border. Such an operation would require crossing southern Iraq or landing from the sea. It would hand the most exposed target imaginable to a power with total air and naval superiority. Infiltration is another matter. Small boats, a few men, one night. And notice, the logic of that move is almost identical to the American island calculus. Both sides are looking for something they can hold when they sit down at the table. Washington looks for it in territory, an island, a terminal, a stockpile. Tehran looks for it in people, captured personnel, a visible hole punched in a state's sovereignty. The difference isn't scale, but reversibility. If an island can't be held, you withdraw, and the bill is military. If a prisoner file opens, it stays open for months and sets the agenda for the whole war. The economic front of this war is knotted in two narrow waterways. At Hormuz, the US reimposed its naval blockade on Iranian ports and introduced a transit fee on cargo passing through. The United Nations maritime body stated that the measure has no legal basis. Central Command, for its part, announces that since early May, it has helped some 900 commercial vessels and hundreds of millions of barrels of crude make the passage. Since Tuesday night, those Lancers have been flying without pause, and they dropped their loads first on Iran's southern coast. Follow that coastline on the map. At the mouth of the Strait sits Bandar Abbas, the main base of Iran's navy and the country's largest commercial port. Just east of it, Sirik. To the northwest, Bushehr. At the northern end of the Gulf, the port cities of Khuzestan, Mashhad, Sarbanda. And to the east, close to the Pakistani border, Chabahar. Every one of those names appeared on the target list of the last 12 nights. So what's being struck isn't individual facilities, it's an entire coastline. And the real strength of that coast was never on the surface, which is exactly where you see why the B-1 Lancer fleet was called in. The timing is no coincidence either. The Lancers came into the fight only days after Trump signaled a possible strike on an Iranian underground nuclear facility. His own words were blunt.
And we will absolutely attack any site where they're even thinking about nuclear. We'll be hitting it very, very powerfully.
Since Iran has spent decades building its coastal defense underground, missile positions carved into mountains, munitions depots buried in rock, fast attack craft pens cut through coastal cliffs and opening directly onto the sea, tunnels, underground command centers, entrances concealed behind false openings. The logic was simple. Everything on the surface can be struck in the first hours. A headquarters meters beneath the ground cannot. That doctrine is why the regime, under months of campaigning, could still issue orders and still fire missiles. At least it cannot be struck with an ordinary bomb. Bunker buster munitions were designed to solve exactly that problem, and the platform that carries them in the largest load is the Lancer. Indeed, those bombs were filmed being loaded at the base in the United Kingdom. An Al Jazeera crew recorded ground teams at Fairford loading bunker-busting bombs onto bombers, fitted with kits that turn unguided munitions into precision weapons. Yet what should be measured about this underground architecture isn't its depth, it's its breadth. No underground facility lives on its own. It needs ventilation, it needs power, it needs water, it needs a steady resupply line for personnel and munitions. And all of those connections surface sooner or later. Which is why a campaign targeting the underground focuses not on the inside of the mountain, but on the points where the mountain meets the surface. Entrance mouths, ventilation shafts, power lines, supply roads. A tunnel that cannot breathe is no longer a headquarters, it's just a cellar. The second weakness is communication. A command center meters beneath the ground can speak to the surface only through cable or antenna, and those connection points sit on the surface. Depth protects you from a bomb, but starves you of signal. The deeper you go, the less you can talk to the outside world. The target list Central Command released on the night of July 22nd confirms this. What was struck? Maritime capabilities, missile and drone storage facilities, coastal surveillance sites, and air defense assets across southern Iran. It's easy to take that list for an ordinary target breakdown, yet there's a sequence inside it, and that sequence tells you how an entire coastal defense was dismantled. First, the eyes. Coastal surveillance sites are a Navy's radar network. Which ship is where, on what heading, at what speed? That's where it's seen. Once those sites go silent, every weapon left behind goes blind. An anti-ship missile in the hands of a system that can't see its target is nothing but a tube. Then the hands. Missile and drone storage facilities, most of them underground. Then the arms. Maritime capabilities, fast attack craft, mine-laying vessels, naval bases. Indeed, reports of a strike on the Ziyarrat naval base at Sirik came the same night. And finally, the shield. Air defense assets. Take those four in sequence and there's no coast left to defend, only a strip that can be flown over freely. The map explains why that strip matters so much. Iran's southern coast is the country's only real door to the outside world. There's the Caspian to the north, but the Caspian is a closed sea. You don't reach the ocean from there. So exports and imports, oil and food, all pass through the same narrow strip. And the ports lined along it are also the Navy's bases. At Bandar Abbas, the commercial terminal sits beside the naval base. At Chabahar, the port and military infrastructure are intertwined. Before the war, that was an advantage. Logistics gathered in one place. In war, it reversed completely. A single strike costs you military and commercial capability at once. There's also the layer directly behind the coast. Fuel depots, shipyards, repair facilities, and underground storage areas. So when a port is struck, what's affected isn't the quay, it's the entire backyard that keeps that quay running. The result has become measurable too. By Central Command's statement, since the blockade resumed, 9 commercial vessels have been rerouted and 1 has been disabled. And this dismantling has no way back, or rather, it isn't meant to. Most of the targets struck aren't the kind you replace in a few days. Rebuilding a coastal surveillance radar means first sourcing the equipment, and most of that equipment comes from supply chains under sanctions. Renewing a fast attack craft flotilla takes shipyards, engines, and electronics. Replacing an air defense battery means buying from abroad, and sealing a pierced tunnel network again is an engineering job measured in months. So every link cut each night takes away not only today's capability, but the capability of the months ahead. When a country cannot replace what it loses, that loss isn't damage, it's erosion. And the strategic consequence of that erosion gathers in one place: Hormuz. Since the start of this war, Tehran's strongest card has been the ability to threaten maritime traffic through the Strait. That ability isn't a missile. It's a chain made of radar, depot, boat, base, tunnel, and air defense. If one link breaks, the others manage. But if all of them are cut, what's left isn't a threat, only a statement. And the links of that chain were cut one by one over 12 nights. And that same night, the war entered the capital. Air defense systems were reported active east of Tehran. Accounts from the ground described explosions in the direction of Pardis and heavy defensive activity over the capital's skies. The site that stood out as a target was telling: Parchin, one of the Revolutionary Guard's large military complexes, and a target already struck in February and March of this war. It isn't hard to see why Parchin keeps appearing on the list. This isn't a single barracks. It's a sprawling military-industrial complex of hundreds of structures, including munitions production and test ranges. It sits just southeast of the capital, the doorstep of Tehran's defense industry. When a military complex on a capital's doorstep can be struck a third time, the air defense ring around that capital has already been pierced. Nor are the targets around the capital limited to that. Throughout this war, the area around the airport west of Tehran has been struck repeatedly. The military airspace ringing the capital was among the campaign's earliest targets. Civil aviation taking its share was inevitable. When air defense fires all night over a country's capital, that sky closes to scheduled flights as well. The same night, an explosion was reported in a residential building in the Narmak district in the north of the capital. The regime's state media announced it as a gas explosion. That announcement is itself the clearest indicator of the night. When an administration explains a midnight explosion in its capital as a gas accident while the whole country has been bombed for 12 nights, that isn't information, it's a management decision. The aim isn't to convey the truth, but to make the capital look normal. And the price of that choice is heavy. You can deny a strike on the front line, nobody's looking there. But in a capital of millions, someone who hears air defense that same night and then sees the words gas accident on screen makes a choice between the two. And that choice never falls on the side of the screen. Another part of the capital matters far more in military terms. The northeast of Tehran is known as the district where the residences of the regime's senior figures sit, and those residences are assessed to connect to underground shelters. So air defense firing over the capital isn't merely a technical event. It's a declaration that the regime's most protected surroundings are now within range. Nor did the wave stop at the capital. That same night, explosions were reported at points that hadn't been seriously targeted in this war until then, such as Kashan and Zanjan. Tabriz shook in the northwest. a refinery was struck in Mashhad. A fire in the mountains around Shiraz grew for hours. The meaning is simple. The target list is no longer geographically bounded. At the northern end of the coastal line sat a target of an entirely different kind, Khuzestan. That night, successive heavy explosions were reported in Avaz, Mashhad, Sarbandar, and Ramshir. The Shalamche border area and terminal was struck. A point near Andimeshk was targeted. Explosions were heard in Bushehr and Sirik. Yet one target on that list carries a meaning different from all the others. The Valier Asa base in Avaz. By the accounts, this base is one of the Revolutionary Guard's most important command centers in Khuzestan province. And what it oversees isn't merely a garrison. The province's armored units, commando units, missile units, artillery units, and naval elements are all tied to this center. And the most critical layer, the same base also oversees the province's regional Revolutionary Guard and Basij battalion network. The table between the US and Iran collapsed loudly in July 2026. And now, for the first time in its history, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is facing the threat of annihilation. Because the United States opened its largest airstrike wave since February 28th. On the night of July 17th to 18th attack, the target was the three arteries holding Iran's south up: critical ports, railways, and bridges. In a single night, those arteries were severed, one by one. At the center of this wave stood a single name: Bandar Abbas. This is no ordinary port. It is at once the main headquarters of the Iranian Navy, the country's largest commercial gateway, and the key point of the Strait of Hormuz, the place where all of Iran's weight in the south rests. And the US paralyzed this point in a single night. First, the mouths of the two highway tunnels carrying the city's entry and exit were heavily damaged. Then the bridges. 5 or 6 road and rail bridges were targeted in one night, some destroyed entirely. The main crossing over the Shur River snapped right down the middle. Drivers began using not asphalt but dry riverbeds. The real-time collapse of infrastructure looks exactly like this. Today, we'll talk about how a handful of air operations pushed the region's most feared force to the edge of existence, how Iran's last lifeline reaching to China was cut, and whether Iran can come out of this vice alive. Before we go on, one small favor. Independent analysis like this is suppressed by the algorithm. Subscribing, liking, and leaving even a single word in the comments directly helps this video reach people. Now to the heart of it. Why is the US striking not Iran's weapons, but everything that carries them? None of the bridges struck were chosen at random, and that's exactly the point. The current target isn't Iran's weapons, it's everything that carries, feeds, and directs those weapons. Even an army with the most advanced missile is useless if it can't move it to the front, can't reach its fuel, has its radar blinded. Striking a bridge is less flashy than striking a missile, but a far more lasting blow, because a downed bridge paralyzes an entire front until a new one is built. And nothing captures this shift in method better than those underground tunnels we mentioned at the start. Because these aren't ordinary road passages. In the war's earlier phases, the US had tried to strike the nuclear and uranium enrichment facilities Iran buried meters under its mountains. But destroying those deep targets was both hard and uncertain. For decades, Iran has dug one of the world's most extensive underground networks, sheltering its missiles, fast boats, drones, and command posts inside that fortified labyrinth. That's why hitting the tunnel mouths is a double blow. It severs the movement south, and it exposes the ammunition, boats, and command lines sheltered inside. And Bandar Abbas is also the base of the fast boats and sea drones that enforce the blockade on commercial ships in Hormuz. So hitting it means touching the very hand that enforces that blockade. The same logic applies to the coastal bridges. The road and rail lines connecting Bandar Abbas to Shiraz and onto Tehran, the arteries CENTCOM calls military logistics infrastructure, were the only corridor carrying the Revolutionary Guard's ammunition and missile launchers south. The US dismantled this corridor layer by layer. It struck the rail junction, Iran Shah Airport deep in the country's east, and the telecom towers. The port city, its power cut, sank into darkness. Now we have to name this picture correctly. This is not a retaliation, but a system teardown. The US is cutting, in sequence, whatever holds the IRGC up. Its hand at sea, ships, attack boats, its eye in the air, radars, air defense, its firepower, drone and missile depots, and most important of all, its blood, its fuel, its electricity, its logistics, and, as we'll see shortly, its supply line reaching to China. Because the IRGC isn't just an army, it's a state within a state that holds Iran's ports, its smuggling networks, a significant part of its oil exports, and all of the regime's armed power. Cutting an army's ammunition weakens it, but cutting its ammunition, its treasury, and its internal network of influence all at once strips it to the skeleton. And Trump's real aim isn't to win a single battle. It's to dissolve this connective tissue and snap, one by one, every bond that holds the organization together. And the most distant, most vital vessel of that connective tissue was not on the coast, but at the country's opposite end, in the north, right at the Turkmenistan border. The US destroyed the Aq Khan railway bridge in Golestan province with cruise missiles. At first glance, it might look like an ordinary target. It isn't. Because this bridge sits directly on the railway corridor connecting China to Iran, the key point of the line that is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, running from Xi'an through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to Tehran. The story of this corridor explains the war's strategic logic all on its own. China deliberately built this railway to Tehran so it could access Iranian oil without passing through US-controlled waters, Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca. The aim was a land route that sanctions and naval blockades couldn't lock. For Iran, this line was the guarantee of breathing even when the strait was closed. The US striking it, experts say, goes beyond an ordinary military target. It is a direct blow to Iran's ability to evade sanctions and to sustain its economic tie with its two great partners. Back to the coast. After these blows at the two ends, Bandar Abbas in the south, the China Bridge in the north, the wave descended on the mouth of the strait, onto the islands. Keshem, Kish, Bushehr, Sirik, Jask. Coastal cities and islands were struck one after another. The US also targeted Greater Tumb Island, right in the middle of the strait. To see what the target was, you need to know how the IRGC's naval power works. The large warships, easy to detect, had already been destroyed in the war's first days. The real remaining threat was those small, fast attack boats we mentioned earlier, because they can be disassembled and reassembled, can come and go and hide. Destroying them one by one is far harder than sinking large ships. Even so, the US targeted dozens of them in recent days. Looking at the scale shows how broad the dismantling is. The US announced it had struck close to 90 military targets along Iran's coastline in a single wave, including short-range air defense systems, missile depots, and more than 60 IRGC attack boats. When a power station on Kish was struck, the island was plunged into sudden darkness. And in Chabahar, the surveillance tower from which the regime tracked commercial ships and coordinated attacks was leveled, a strike that directly curbs Iran's ability to target civilian vessels. Seen one by one, small targets. Seen together, the systematic dismantling of Iran's ability to close Hormuz. And the strikes are no longer confined to the coast. The campaign shifted inward to Avaz in the southwest and to the airport in Sistan Baluchistan in the southeast. The message is clear. No corner of Iran is beyond reach. So what is Iran doing? It's striking not where it has lost, but where it can hurt. Its doctrine is clear. According to the Revolutionary Guard's commanders, soil is soil. All of Iran, from south to north, is an indivisible whole, and every country hosting a US base is a legitimate target. That's why the retaliation moved to the Strait's far shore, to the Gulf. Iran struck bases and facilities hosting the US in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Jordan with waves of missiles and drones. The targets reportedly included a port base in Bahrain and the Ali Al Salem air base in Kuwait. The irony is that even Qatar, the mediator, took its share of these attacks. The scale of the fire Iran directed at the Gulf is nothing to dismiss. Toward Kuwait alone, It's reported that since the war's start, hundreds of ballistic missiles and more than 1,000 drones have been launched. And though most were shot down, some reached their targets. Iran's calculation is simple. The more it loads its losses at home onto the US's allies and the bases they host, the more it makes the war's cost unbearable for Washington. And the most symbolic blow landed on Kuwait. Iran damaged a water desalination and power facility that supplies nearly all of the country's drinking water. For a country in the middle of the desert, this is a threat heavier than any military target. And Iran drew a clear line. If you keep touching our infrastructure, we will strike the infrastructure of the Gulf's Arab states more destructively than anything so far. The war spilled even beyond borders. In northern Iraq, in Sulaymaniyah, pro-Iran forces reportedly struck a weapons depot of the Kurdish opposition, causing large explosions. The US Embassy in Baghdad issued an alert to its citizens. In short, Iran is trying to make the whole region pay the price of the pressure on its own soil. So why did this table collapse? Because until just a few weeks ago, everything was going the opposite way. After an agreement reached in June, the picture had returned to normal. Ship traffic in Hormuz had revived, tankers had begun crossing, and oil markets strained for months had settled. The world thought the worst was behind it. But there was a clue to how fragile the ceasefire was. US Vice President J.D. Vance implied that the truce was in fact being used to refill the world's depleted oil stocks. In other words, what one side saw as a lasting peace was, for the other, a breather. Then, in a single night, everything reversed. Iran opened fire on commercial ships in Hormuz, an open violation of the ceasefire's most basic condition, safe passage through the Strait. What's more, the attack came hours before Trump was to travel to a NATO summit in Ankara. Trump's answer was a single sentence: "As far as I'm concerned, it's over." What followed was a chain of escalation. As the US struck dozens of targets one Tuesday night and reimposed sanctions on Iran's oil exports, Iran declared the Strait closed to foreign ships and kept hitting tankers. Oil jumped 9% in a single day. Each wave triggered the next, and this cycle carried the conflict to this point within a week. The besiege isn't a frontline formation in the conventional sense. It's a militia network, organized in cities, in neighborhoods, in factories, and in universities. And this network's real function for the regime isn't fighting an outside enemy, it's maintaining control inside. It's the structure that disperses a crowd in the street, sets up checkpoints, and knows the neighborhood. Strike an army's division and you reduce its strength at the front. Strike a militia network's regional command node and you've touched that regime's capacity to govern its own street. Since the value of the besieged structure lies not in its weapons but in its network, an organization that knows who lives where, knows the neighborhood, and can gather a crowd within hours. When that network's central coordination breaks, the units don't vanish, but they can no longer move at once on a single order. And the entire power of an internal security apparatus comes from exactly that simultaneity. Why Khuzestan was chosen becomes clear from the geography. This is Iran's heart of oil and industry, a province facing the coast, the ports, and the Iraqi border all at once. The country's export artery and its military logistics intersect on the same ground. The same night, a large fire was reported at a military base in Bebahan. The spread of the flames in the footage suggests not a single building, but a whole facility area caught fire. And this campaign's quietest layer was seen that night as well. Satellite imagery revealed that the large antenna on Delak Mountain northwest of Shiraz was heavily damaged after the recent strikes. Indeed, it appears to be gone. The logic of this target differs from all the rest. When an antenna is struck, no missile and no boat is destroyed. What is destroyed is the connection. The line between units in the regions and the military command centers. And an army's most dangerous condition isn't being left without weapons. It's being left unable to hear itself. On top of this military picture, something else was added the same week: a new rule. Trump's statement was blunt. From now on, every time Iran fires at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, by missile, by rocket, by drone, by whatever means, America will destroy one bridge or one power plant. And that includes facilities inside or right beside the capital, Tehran. And this rule wasn't declared in a vacuum. The same week, the physical preparation on the ground became visible too. Central Command announced that more than 50,000 American service members are deployed in the region and on full alert. Air assets were added to that. By an Israeli Channel 14 report, one of the US Air Force's most advanced electronic warfare platforms, the EA-37B Compass Call, reached RAF Mildenhall in the United Kingdom and then set course for the Middle East. This aircraft's job isn't dropping bombs. It's disrupting the enemy's radars, early warning systems, and command and control networks. That is, preventing the other side from seeing, talking, and coordinating. And that capability carries a specific meaning in military terms. It's typically used ahead of large-scale operations. A note for the record here. This platform isn't entering the Iran war for the first time. Central Command had already added the EA-37B to the operational asset list it published at the start of April this year. So today's movement isn't a first, it's a reinforcement. The same report also describes a broad strengthening of the military posture in the region. The resumption of B-1B missions from the United Kingdom, dozens of KC-135 and KC-46 tankers shifted to safer bases, continuing transfers of equipment and personnel by C-17, and the deployment of E-11A airborne battlefield network aircraft, F-16S, A-10S, and strategic MQ-4C Triton drones. There's a relocation as well. By the accounts, the US pulled some equipment and aircraft out of Al Udeid base in Qatar and moved them to bases in Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. Look at that list item by item, and it resembles an ordinary rotation. Read together, it says something else. If you're expanding your tanker fleet, you're planning to increase flight hours. If you're sending an electronic warfare aircraft, you're planning to silence the other side's air defense. If you're massing command and control and surveillance aircraft, you're planning to manage many targets at once. And if you're taking your assets out of a base within range and spreading them across other countries, you're expecting retaliation. US officials have issued no formal statement about the purpose of these movements. But an army's intent is read less from its statements than from its deployments. The military literature term for Trump's sentence is well established: automatic retaliation doctrine. That is, attaching a fixed, pre-announced price to every move by the other side. The logic is plain. In classic deterrence, the other side calculates, what might they do? There's uncertainty. Under automatic retaliation, uncertainty disappears. Make your move and you know the price exactly. Yet this doctrine carries a serious risk, and it should be stated honestly. Once you've declared it, you have to carry it out. Fail to, and your deterrence collapses. Carry it out, and you're no longer the one choosing escalation. The other side chooses for you. So this rule takes the pace of the war out of Washington's hands and puts it at the trigger in the Strait. In Tehran's calculus, that declaration can mean two things. First, deterrence. Don't fire, the price is heavy. Second, the reverse, an opportunity. Since the cheapest instrument the regime holds is a single trigger in the Strait, and what it would set off is the American military targeting civilian infrastructure. That is the shortest route to manufacturing victimhood before international opinion. Every automatic rule you declare also leaves a button in the other side's hand. The US Secretary of Defense told senators the war's cost had reached $37.5 billion and defended a supplemental budget request. The House approved a $95 billion package for war funding, roughly a 48% increase over the previous budget. Washington doesn't see this war as an operation lasting a few weeks. A budget is the most honest indicator of intent. And right in the middle of this escalation, a decision was announced that will shape the region's future for decades. The American administration approved a nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia. By the details reported, the agreement could open the way for the kingdom to enrich its own fuel for civilian reactors, and it does so without adopting the gold standard of international oversight. To grasp the weight of that, you have to look back 8 years. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman spoke plainly in a 2018 interview. If Iran develops a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible. Now set the two pictures side by side. On one side, a bombing campaign running for 12 nights to block Iran's nuclear capability. On the other, an agreement in the same region opening the enrichment door to another country. For Washington, there's a calculation in this, keeping its ally under its own roof, tying Riyadh's nuclear program to itself rather than to some other power. But for the region, the outcome lands in the same place. Enrichment capability spreads once again. And it hands Iran's narrative material as well. What's forbidden to us is permitted to our neighbor, is the regime's easiest line of defense. Within all this escalation, diplomacy isn't entirely dead. By the accounts, Qatari mediators are in contact with American officials, Tehran and Oman, working toward a new agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and halt the fighting. But by a regional source's account, Iranian officials have yet to accept the mediators' latest proposal. And in the background of that picture stands the 14-point memorandum signed last month and since collapsed. So the parties tried an agreement once and it didn't hold. The current effort is to set that same table a second time. Which is why two clocks are running at once this week. One is military. Every night another target list gets shorter. The other is diplomatic. Every day another proposal waits on the table. Let's make the picture clear. For 12 nights the same categories were struck. Coastal surveillance, missile and drone depots, naval elements, air defense. From Bandar Abbas to Chabahar, from Bushehr to the ports of Khuzestan, an entire coastline was left undefended. Iran's chain for threatening maritime traffic was cut link by link, and the deepest link in that chain was underground. The regime's 40-year defense doctrine rested on a single assumption: go deep enough and you cannot be reached. Yet no underground headquarters lives on its own. Its ventilation, its power, and its supply lines surface. And it was precisely those surface points that were struck this week. Then the target list widened. The command center in Khuzestan was struck, both the province's military brain and the regional node of the Besiege network. The antenna at Shiraz was struck, the line between units and command. Kashan, Zanjan, Tabriz, Mashhad. The campaign opened into the country's center and north. And finally, air defense fired over the capital. That night in the capital, announced as a gas explosion, declared something else entirely. The war is no longer at the front, it's over Tehran. In the coming days, the pulse of this rupture will be taken from a few places. Whether any defense can be rebuilt along the coastal line, whether underground facilities formally enter the target list, whether the rule Trump declared is applied for the first time, and whether the proposal on the Qatari channel is accepted. A quick break. Liking, a one-word comment and subscribing directly help this video reach far more people. Because now we move to the least discussed, but perhaps most decisive dimension of this war, the invisible ceiling that stops even the US. Now we come to the most striking part. Because however much the US looks like it's winning on the ground, there's an invisible ceiling binding its hand: oil. Here's the surface picture. As the naval blockade cuts exits from the ports, Trump spoke of imposing a 20% toll on passage through the Strait. The number of ships is falling, tankers are fleeing the Gulf, and this channel, through which roughly a fifth of the world's crude passed before the war, is clogging. In Washington, Congress put a $95 billion war package in motion. The US Treasury targeted the covert shipping and finance networks that let Iran sell oil in evasion of sanctions. But the real issue isn't prices rising, it's why they've stayed far lower than expected. When the Strait closed, Goldman Sachs called it the largest oil supply shock in history, with supply down at least 11 million barrels a day. Experts predicted prices could spike to $2, even $300 a barrel. Yet prices stayed in the $90 to $120 band. The reason? In one word: stocks. According to JP Morgan, as the crisis began, global inventories held close to 8.5 billion barrels, far above the historical norm, and everyone drew them down at an unprecedented rate. Even China, the world's biggest importer, cut its imports by 4 million barrels a day, both shifting to electric vehicles and emptying the reserves it had built up for years. In short, the world escaped an acute shock because everyone was draining their stockpiles. But this can't go on forever, and that's the US's dilemma. Trump defended his decision to end the war at the G7 precisely for this reason. He said reserves would run out within 4 weeks. Today, those stores are far emptier. The The US Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR, per EIA data, has fallen from about 415 million barrels before the war to 325 million, the lowest level since 1983. And you can't fully empty this reserve either. The oil is stored in vast underground salt caverns, and every withdrawal risks collapsing them. At least 160 million barrels must stay inside at all times to maintain operational pressure. That's why JP Morgan reckons things get really difficult once global inventories drop below 6.8 billion barrels. What's more, Iran could deepen the wound. Beyond the Strait, it could squeeze the Bab al-Mandab, which connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Because Saudi Arabia redirected its exports westward, the oil passing through here rose from 3 million barrels a day to 8 million. Iran could shut it through the Houthis, its proxy, or directly with missiles and drones, which would push the global shortfall to roughly 20 million barrels. That's the whole point. The fire on the ground has an invisible ceiling, and what sets it is not missiles, but the number of barrels in the world's tanks. Despite this economic ceiling, the military preparation on the ground looks like the herald of something far bigger. The US massed at its base in Jordan 12 F-16CJ jets, specially designed to hunt enemy radars, known in war jargon as Wild Weasel. With anti-radiation missiles, they exist to blind Iran's air defense. A massive air bridge was set up from the skies of Europe to bases in the Middle East. Numerous fighters were shifted toward Jordan and Israel. And the US also dispatched thousands more Marines trained for amphibious landings. There's talk that Trump is weighing an expansion of the campaign to the core of Iran's strategic infrastructure, and even preparations for a limited ground operation with regional allies. Yet just days ago, Trump was openly rejecting ground troops. That such an option is now on the table is another sign of how fast the war has escalated. Israel, for its part, left a one-sentence warning. Any Iranian retaliation will meet a crushing response. Massing radar hunter aircraft on a front means one thing. A far more intense air campaign is coming soon, and the enemy's ability to see will be blinded first. The sky of a country whose air defense has collapsed is nothing more than a target list. The signs on the ground point the same way. Inside Iran, there's talk that the Arabs of Ahvaz and Kurdish groups in various regions are being rearmed. So Iran, for the first time in a long while, may face outside air and possible ground pressure, and stirring internal ethnic fault lines at the same time. So where does this war evolve from here? The answer lies in the deadlock both sides are stuck in. First, the US. However dominant it looks on the ground, there's an invisible limit binding its hand. The oil ceiling we just saw. With its stocks depleted, it can't afford a full war or a permanent closure of the Strait. If it advances, it risks a ground quagmire, and if it retreats, it effectively cedes the Strait to Iran. What's more, its Gulf allies, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, are now within Iran's range. That's why the IRGC on the edge of annihilation framing is incomplete. The side applying pressure on the ground isn't limitless either. Iran's deadlock is far heavier. Its logistics are cut, its lifeline to China is severed, its treasury is drying up under sanctions, and ethnic fault lines are heating up inside. But it still holds dangerous cards. Hidden attack boats, mines that could be poured into the Strait, missiles that reach the Gulf. And a force backed into a corner can make its most destructive move at exactly that moment. So the question isn't whether Iran wins, it's whether it can stay standing while being stripped to the skeleton. Meanwhile, because each side tells its own story, caution is essential. Figures like close to 90 targets and over 1,000 drones rest largely on claims from CENTCOM and open-source accounts. Iran denies them, and the US in turn called Iran's 2 tankers hit mines claim a lie. Left-leaning outlets frame the same events as uncontrolled escalation, right-leaning ones as deserved punishment. And this is no drill. In the darkened Iranian cities and in water-damaged Kuwait alike, civilians are under this fire. Iranian official bodies report civilian casualties. These cannot be independently verified. And the most critical part, 2 directions are running at once. On one side, escalation. Radar hunters and amphibious forces are massing, Even a limited ground operation is discussed. Iran threatens to spread the war to the Bab al-Mandab, to Iraq, to the whole Gulf. On the other, a quiet salvage effort. The two sides are trying to keep the preliminary deal alive. Iran keeps up contact through Oman and Qatar, and Trump himself downplays it all as a skirmish. So the war neither fully ends nor becomes total. It hangs in a dangerous uncertainty. And in the end, this whole picture comes down to a single question. It's no longer, when does this war end? It's whether the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps can come out of this vice that is choking it, or whether, as it falls, it will drag down with it a fuel-cut peninsula, a strait on the edge of clogging, and an entire region. The signals to watch are clear. Whether the roads to Bandar Abbas reopen, whether the attack boats return to the sea, and where Iran's next retaliation lands. The Strait, the Bab al-Mandab, or a Gulf capital. Because a guard army, just like an empire, collapses most often not at the moment it looks strongest, but when its blood is quietly cut. And those darkened streets of Bandar Abbas may be the first sign of that silent severing. So the Strait is open. It's just an armed corridor now. The market made its own decision regardless. Weekly transits through the Strait fell sharply, and Brent settled above $89. The reason is clear. 2 Greek-operated tankers were struck near Hormuz. One caught fire and its crew was evacuated. Another tanker took a hit off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. Ship owners no longer want to enter this water. And now a second strait has been added to the war. Yemen's Houthis declared an immediately effective naval blockade against Saudi Arabia, announcing that every vessel entering or leaving Saudi ports is a target. The trigger was an airstrike on Sana'a airport that blocked the return flight of a Houthi delegation. The response came under the principle of a blockade for a blockade. The strategic reading runs like this. Since pressure on Hormuz didn't blow up oil prices as expected, the Iranian axis reached for a second lever. Bab el-Mandeb is the gateway for trade heading to Europe through Suez. A lockup there hits global supply chains and financial markets more than it hits oil. The aim isn't military victory. It's forcing Washington to the table through cost. While all this preparation runs on, an exit door was placed on the table too. The proposal, led by Qatar, Egypt and Pakistan, contains 3 things. A halt to the fighting, the opening of both routes through the Strait, and the rescue of the memorandum signed in June and since collapsed. Trump rejected it. Iran will pay for what it did first. The logic is plain. An administration that signs a ceasefire immediately after a strike on its own soldiers has left the price it paid uncollected. In Washington's calculus, a ceasefire will come not because Iran asks for one, but because Iran accepts the terms. The US State Department issued a worldwide caution. American diplomatic facilities may be targeted outside the Middle East as well. Indeed, Britain and Germany have begun evacuating their diplomats from Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. An odd escalation played out on the information front as well. The Revolutionary Guard announced it had struck the data infrastructure of a technology company it claimed the US military uses in Bahrain. Bahraini authorities denied it. The claim itself marks a threshold, the intent to carry the war into civilian digital infrastructure. A crack opened in the regime's own narrative during those same days. A member of parliament speaking on state media admitted that Iran struck first. For an administration that has said, "We are only defending ourselves for 5 months," that's a heavy mark. And the economic clock is running fast. Oil has passed $90, gasoline prices are climbing, and domestic backlash against an already unpopular war is growing. The American side has been striking from the air for 5 months and hasn't gotten the result it wanted. So it put an option on the table it had never discussed before: coming ashore. But the plan it put there isn't to invade a country. It's to take a stockpile, an island, a single point, and leave. And the aim isn't military. It's to have something in hand when it sits down at the table. Iran is preparing 3 answers to the same possibility. It's moving its armor south through Khuzestan, talking about infiltrating Kuwait, and, as a last resort, declaring it will strike its own soil. The weak point of all these calculations gathers in the same place. Taking an island takes a day. Holding it takes months. A strike from the air has an end date. A soldier who lands on the ground has no date of return. For 5 months, there's been a line neither side has crossed. Once it is crossed, neither Washington nor Tehran gets to decide alone how this war ends. By an Israeli Channel 14 report, one of the US Air Force's most advanced electronic warfare platforms, the EA-37B Compass Call, reached RAF Mildenhall in the United Kingdom and then set course for the Middle East. This aircraft's job isn't dropping bombs. It's disrupting the enemy's radars, early warning systems, and command and control networks. That is, preventing the other side from seeing, talking, and coordinating. And that capability carries a specific meaning in military terms. It's typically used ahead of large-scale operations. A note for the record here. This platform isn't entering the Iran war for the first time. Central Command had already added the EA-37B to the operational asset list it published at the start of April this year. So today's movement isn't a first, it's a reinforcement. The same report also describes a broad strengthening of the military posture in the region. The resumption of B-1B missions from the United Kingdom, dozens of KC-135 and KC-46 tankers shifted to safer bases, continuing transfers of equipment and personnel by C-17, and the deployment of E-11A airborne battlefield network aircraft, F-16S, A-10S, and strategic MQ-4C Triton drones. There's a relocation as well. By the accounts, the US pulled some equipment and aircraft out of Al Udeid base in Qatar and moved them to bases in Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. Look at that list item by item, and it resembles an ordinary rotation. Read together, it says something else. If you're expanding your tanker fleet, you're planning to increase flight hours. If you're sending an electronic warfare aircraft, you're planning to silence the other side's air defense. If you're massing command and control and surveillance aircraft, you're planning to manage many targets at once. And if you're taking your assets out of a base within range and spreading them across other countries, you're expecting retaliation. US officials have issued no formal statement about the purpose of these movements. But an army's intent is read less from its statements than from its deployments. The military literature term for Trump's sentence is well established: automatic retaliation doctrine. That is, attaching a fixed, pre-announced price to every move by the other side. The logic is plain. In classic deterrence, the other side calculates, what might they do? There's uncertainty. Under automatic retaliation, uncertainty disappears. Make your move and you know the price exactly. Yet this doctrine carries a serious risk, and it should be stated honestly. Once you've declared it, you have to carry it out. Fail to, and your deterrence collapses. Carry it out, and you're no longer the one choosing escalation. The other side chooses for you. So this rule takes the pace of the war out of Washington's hands and puts it at the trigger in the Strait. In Tehran's calculus, that declaration can mean two things. First, deterrence. Don't fire, the price is heavy. Second, the reverse, an opportunity. Since the cheapest instrument the regime holds is a single trigger in the Strait, and what it would set off is the American military targeting civilian infrastructure. That is the shortest route to manufacturing victimhood before international opinion. Every automatic rule you declare also leaves a button in the other side's hand. The US Secretary of Defense told senators the war's cost had reached $37.5 billion and defended a supplemental budget request. The House approved a $95 billion package for war funding, roughly a 48% increase over the previous budget. Washington doesn't see this war as an operation lasting a few weeks. A budget is the most honest indicator of intent. And right in the middle of this escalation, a decision was announced that will shape the region's future for decades. The American administration approved a nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia. By the details reported, the agreement could open the way for the kingdom to enrich its own fuel for civilian reactors, and it does so without adopting the gold standard of international oversight. To grasp the weight of that, you have to look back 8 years. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman spoke plainly in a 2018 interview. If Iran develops a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible. Now set the two pictures side by side. On one side, a bombing campaign running for 12 nights to block Iran's nuclear capability. On the other, an agreement in the same region opening the enrichment door to another country. For Washington, there's a calculation in this. Keeping its ally under its own roof, tying Riyadh's nuclear program to itself rather than to some other power. But for the region, the outcome lands in the same place. Enrichment capability spreads once again. And it hands Iran's narrative material as well. What's forbidden to us is permitted to our neighbor, is the regime's easiest line of defense. Within all this escalation, diplomacy isn't entirely dead. By the accounts, Qatari mediators are in contact with American officials, Tehran and Oman, working toward a new agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and halt the fighting. But by a regional source's account, Iranian officials have yet to accept the mediators' latest proposal. And in the background of that picture stands the 14-point memorandum signed last month and since collapsed. So the parties tried an agreement once and it didn't hold. The current effort is to set that same table a second time. Which is why two clocks are running at once this week. One is military. Every night another target list gets shorter. The other is diplomatic. Every day another proposal waits on the table. Let's make the picture clear. For 12 nights the same categories were struck. Coastal surveillance, missile and drone depots, naval elements, air defense. From Bandar Abbas to Chabahar, from Bushehr to the ports of Khuzestan, an entire coastline was left undefended. Iran's chain for threatening maritime traffic was cut link by link, and the deepest link in that chain was underground. The regime's 40-year defense doctrine rested on a single assumption: go deep enough and you cannot be reached. Yet no underground headquarters lives on its own. Its ventilation, its power, and its supply lines surface. And it was precisely those surface points that were struck this week. Then the target list widened. The command center in Khuzestan was struck, both the province's military brain and the regional node of the Basij network. The antenna at Shiraz was struck, the line between units and command. Kashan, Zanjan, Tabriz, Mashhad. The campaign opened into the country's center and north. And finally, air defense fired over the capital. That night in the capital, announced as a gas explosion, declared something else entirely. The war is no longer at the front, it's over Tehran. In the coming days, the pulse of this rupture will be taken from a few places. Whether any defense can be rebuilt along the coastal line, whether underground facilities formally enter the target list, whether the rule Trump declared is applied for the first time, and whether the proposal on the Qatari Channel is accepted. Iran's real card against this power imbalance is not military, but geographic. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which a large share of the world's oil passes, Iran's single greatest leverage over the global economy. And Iran plays this card skillfully. While the US Navy's escort protection means it can no longer effectively cut sea traffic, it keeps creating constant uncertainty by launching a drone or missile now and then. The effect is economic rather than physical. Every strike pushes oil prices up, sends marine insurance premiums soaring, even temporarily makes some ships impossible to insure. The subtle part is this. Because in countries like China and India, insurance is largely under state control, their ships can sail at far lower risk, meaning that while Iran grants a passage privilege to its friends, it sends freight costs soaring for countries that have no direct arrangement with it. This game of uncertainty gives Iran the power to shake oil markets with a single drone or threat. In this way, Iran holds not just a waterway, but the nerve endings of global trade. And Iran's long-term goal is precisely this: to establish permanent control over the strait and gain leverage over the world economy. When a country can shake the global economy merely by creating uncertainty without fully closing a waterway, its real weapon is not ships, but fear itself. Iran's second major strategy is to spread the pressure not directly onto the US, but onto all of America's partners in the region, what experts call horizontal escalation. The logic is simple but effective. Iran wants to make neighboring countries so uncomfortable that they no longer want to host American forces on their soil. This is a way of pushing the US back step by step from the region, and the farther the aircraft must be based from Iran, the harder it becomes to sustain a continuous air campaign. The traces of this strategy are everywhere. Jordan announced it had intercepted 5 missiles coming from Iran. Egypt reported that an energy facility had come under drone attack. US positions in Kuwait were struck. And the Houthis in Yemen added a second front to the closure of Hormuz by targeting shipping traffic in the Red Sea. So much so that 6 Saudi tankers had to sail around Africa to escape this blockade, adding weeks to their voyages. The most concrete result of this pressure appears along the Iran-Iraq border. In a process experts describe as debasification, Washington is pulling its remaining troops back around Erbil, withdrawing Patriot air defense batteries and radar systems, because these systems have become the prime target of Iran's precise missiles. What is striking is that this wave began with targets near the Iranian coast and advanced step by step toward the Israeli border. That is, Iran is managing to push the US physically back from the region. Iran's foreign ministry went a step further, openly declaring that it expects a possible US ground operation. Iran even reached beyond the region. It warned European countries like Cyprus and Bulgaria not to open their territory as bases for the US. There is real capability behind these warnings. Iran's longest-range ballistic missiles can, in theory, reach all the way to Eastern Europe. But the common assessment of many experts is this. This horizontal escalation could backfire on Iran. After all, the more Arab states Iran unsettles, the more those states might, at some point, unite in a coalition against Iran for their own security, rather than pressuring America. The wider the area you spread the fire across, the more you risk opening fronts against yourself. This is where an unexpected problem complicating America's plan emerges: the reluctance of its allies. Retired General Jack Keene's assessment on this is extremely clear. According to Keene, when the US was ready to force the Strait of Hormuz open, Saudi Arabia refused to let America use its air bases and airspace, and even actively tried to deter the operation. Keene's blunt comment was this: "The Gulf monarchies have no intention of bearing the cost, the potential losses and the damage that could come to oil facilities required to rid the region of Iran's aggression. They want the US and Israel to pay that price. And it is not only reluctance." Keene claimed that some mediating countries were favoring Iran against the US, giving the administration false information about Tehran's true intentions. A concrete consequence of this distrust also followed. Trump dropped Pakistan from the roster of mediators altogether. Keene's assessment on this was blunt as well. How could Pakistan, a party favoring Iran against America, remain a mediator? So the US must contend not only with Iran, but with the timidity of its own allies and the unreliability of the mediators. On the Israeli front, the picture is different. Israeli officials voice satisfaction with the military progress against Iran, but hope the Arab states will do more rather than sit on the sidelines. So the US must contend with this tension between timid Gulf partners on one side and a more aggressive Israel on the other, and with the unreliability of the mediators. But there is a flip side to the coin. Those same Gulf states begin to change their stance when their own infrastructure comes under direct threat. When its own oil facilities were struck by Iran-backed groups, Saudi Arabia joined the US in striking targets in Iraq in retaliation. A coalition is formed less by a common enemy than by a common sense of threat. And as Iran's pressure mounts, that sense of threat grows ever more pronounced in the Gulf. The least discussed, but perhaps most decisive dimension of this picture is the shadow of the two great powers standing behind Iran, China and Russia. The retired general's warning on this is very clear. As long as this reinforcement keeps flowing in, the US can neither make headway in negotiations nor truly eliminate Iran's capacity. The most concrete public example is the 300 to 400 Chinese-made shoulder-fired air defense missiles allegedly sent to Iran. But according to experts, that is not all that is coming in. Targeting information, drone motors and rocket fuel are also part of this flow. And the most striking concrete evidence of this support was seen in the field. Iran's Zulfiqar ballistic missiles are now guided by China's encrypted satellite navigation system, and thanks to this, they maintain a high hit rate despite America's electronic jamming defenses. In other words, China's support is not theoretical. It directly enables Iran's missiles to strike US bases more accurately. This shows why the issue is not merely a US-Iran conflict. If Beijing lines up alongside Iran to the degree of providing military-grade hardware or its critical components, that hands Tehran a lifeline, a virtual phone a friend. And if China joins Russia, which already works closely with Iran, a far larger problem emerges, one that could spill over even into the Pacific. When a regional conflict is fed by the support of the great powers behind it, it ceases to be regional. It turns into the stage of a global power struggle. In the shadow of all this military escalation, there is also a diplomatic front, and that front resembles a theater both sides are playing very carefully. Trump says the talks are proceeding at the request of Iran, backed by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar in particular, with a focus first on opening the Strait and, in a second phase, on addressing nuclear capacity. Iran, in public, declares that it is conducting no talks directly with the US, only meeting with Oman on the Strait. This contradiction is essentially the summary of Iran's strategy. It refuses direct negotiation so as not to appear weak on the home front, but sustains indirect contact through mediators like Oman, Qatar, or Turkey. The formula taking shape through the Oman Channel is also notable. A third intermediate corridor that relies on neither the Iran-controlled route in the north nor the US-backed route in the south. But Iran attaches a critical caveat to this formula. The arrangement is designed as a matter of sovereignty, still giving it the authority to determine which ship may enter the Persian Gulf. In other words, Iran offers a technical compromise on the one hand, while preserving its control over the Strait on the other. Trump, meanwhile, one day says, "A deal is very close," and the next morning calls Iran's leadership incredibly two-faced. A negotiation in which both sides are simultaneously at the table and in the field resembles a race to buy time rather than a genuine solution. And who wins that race is often understood only after it is too late. When you put all these pieces into a single picture, one truth emerges. In this crisis, it is not only Iran but the US too that is backed into a corner. Iran's dilemma is plain. Its nuclear facilities are under threat, its economy is grappling with sanctions, and every escalation isolates it further in the region. But America's dilemma is at least as real. On one side, depleted missile stockpiles and timid allies. On the other, targets hidden 90 meters underground and the risk that every strike shakes the world economy and spreads the war across the entire region. And on top of that, the ever more pronounced shadow of China and Russia behind it all. This is where Trump's last chance rhetoric takes on meaning, precisely at the center of this double dilemma. It may be as much a bid to buy time as a show of force. A full military campaign would deplete stocks, send oil prices soaring, and trigger an escalation with no guaranteed outcome. But diplomacy buys time too, and Iran may be using that time to hide its facilities even deeper. The most dangerous part of this picture is exactly this. Both options, the strike and the negotiation alike, carry serious risk within them, and neither offers a safe exit. What's more, the pressure of time forces both sides toward an ever sharper choice with each passing day. Waiting means deepening the facilities for Iran and eroding the arsenal for the US. The one certain thing is this: the Middle East stands at a sharper crossroads than it has seen in a long time, and every step taken in the coming days may shape perhaps the next decade of the region. Perhaps the real lesson of history is this: launching an air campaign is easy, but finishing it against an enemy hidden beneath the mountains, with great powers standing behind it, is far harder. And the decision on whether that match will catch is being made in the coming days, at both ends of the fuse, in Washington and Tehran alike, at the very same time. So what do you think? Is Trump's last chance move a pressure play that will genuinely bring Iran to the table, or the beginning of an escalation that will drag the entire region into a far larger war? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay informed about this kind of special war and geopolitics analysis from PPR Global, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.